A 13-year-old boy stands alone on a cracked highway shoulder, holding something that shouldn't exist. A faded photograph, 2 decades old, showing a family that was destroyed in a single night. The girl in that picture vanished when she was 6. No body, no ransom, no answers. Just silence that swallowed an entire family whole. Now that photograph has fallen from a battered black truck speeding away from an abandoned gas station, and the boy who picked it up has just placed it into the hands of the most dangerous man in the county, a scarred road captain whose younger sister was the girl in that picture. The biker's face goes white, his hands begin to shake, and every engine in that parking lot roars to life. This story will break you. Stay with me until the very end. I promise you, the ending is something you will never forget. If you're watching right now, hit that like button, drop a comment, tell me what city you're watching from. Let's get into it. The boy had been running for 11 minutes before his lungs started to betray him. Not the kind of running that children do for sport or play. This was the desperate, hunched-over sprint of someone who had learned early that the world does not slow down for small bodies. Noah Mercer was 13 years old, 5'2", and 63 pounds lighter than the average boy his age. His sneakers were splitting at the seams. His jacket was 2 sizes too large, stolen from a donation bin behind a church thrift store 3 towns back. And the wind cutting across Route 9 in early November carried the kind of cold that didn't just chill skin, it entered bone, settled there, and refused to leave. He had seen the truck. That was the problem. A black pickup, not new, not old, just forgettable in the way that certain vehicles are designed to be forgettable. Dented rear quarter panel, a faded county registration sticker on the bumper that didn't match the plates, one functioning taillight. The other had been smashed out and covered with red tape that had started peeling at the corners. The truck had been idling behind the abandoned Sinclair station off the highway exit, engine ticking in the silence, and Noah had watched from behind the rusted propane cage because watching was the only skill he had ever been praised for. Nobody praises a quiet kid for being quiet. They just stop noticing him. The driver's hand had appeared through the window, thick knuckles, a scar running from the base of the thumb to the wrist, old, white, deliberate. The hand flicked a cigarette onto the gravel, and the truck lurched forward, tires spitting dust. Something small tumbled from the open bed as the vehicle swung onto the highway ramp. Noah waited until the taillights dissolved into the gray distance. Then he crossed the cracked lot, stepping over broken glass and flattened beer cans, and crouched beside the object, a leather envelope. Soft, weathered, the color of dark tobacco. The stitching along one edge had come apart, and the flap was held closed by a single brass snap that was green with age. He opened it. Inside was a photograph. Not a digital print, not a phone screenshot laminated at a drugstore. This was a real photograph, the kind with a white border and a faintly glossy surface, the kind that absorbed fingerprints and held them like evidence. The colors had faded toward amber. A man and a woman stood behind 2 children on what appeared to be the front steps of a small farmhouse. The man's hand rested on the shoulder of a boy who looked about 10. The woman held a girl, 5, maybe 6, on her hip. Everyone was smiling except the boy. The boy stared directly into the camera with the expression of someone who already understood that this moment would not last. Noah turned the photograph over. Written in blue ballpoint ink, in handwriting that shook slightly at the curves. Calloway family, 1998. Before. Before what? He slid the photograph back into the envelope and looked down the highway in both directions. Nothing. No cars. No sound except wind pressing against the dead grass along the shoulder and the distant percussion of a loose tin panel on the gas station roof. He started walking. The diner appeared 2 miles later, crouching low against the landscape like something that had given up trying to be noticed. Mel's. Hand-painted sign. 3 pickup trucks in the gravel lot, a sedan with a cracked windshield, and 7 motorcycles parked in formation near the entrance. Heavy machines, chrome dulled by road dust, saddlebags scarred with miles. The bikes were not recreational. They were instruments of distance, tools belonging to men who measured their lives in highway lines rather than calendar pages. Noah pushed through the door. The warmth hit him first, then the smell. Coffee that had been sitting on a burner too long, bacon grease embedded in the ceiling tiles, and beneath it all, the faint ghost of leather and engine oil that clung to the men occupying the back corner. 7 of them. 3 booths pushed together. Plates of eggs and toast, mugs of black coffee, a few glasses of water untouched. They wore cuts, leather vests with patches that read Iron Saints MC across the back in arched white letters over a clenched iron fist gripping a single flame. The patches were faded, stitched and restitched. These were not costume pieces. These were uniforms earned through years of road, weather, and the kind of loyalty that doesn't require explanation because it has already been tested. Nobody looked up when Noah entered. That was the first thing he noticed. Not hostility, not curiosity, just the disciplined absence of attention that comes from men who have learned that reacting to every stimulus is a weakness. They continued eating. One of them, a heavy man with a gray beard and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose, turned a page of a folded newspaper. Another, younger, with a shaved head and a tattoo of a compass rose on his neck, scrolled through a phone with one hand while holding a fork in the other. At the center of the group sat a man who occupied space differently. Dane Calloway was 42 years old, 6'1", shoulders that carried weight not because of muscle alone, but because of the invisible tonnage of years spent refusing to collapse under things that would have crushed softer men. His hair was dark, cut short, streaked early with gray at the temples. His jawline was hard and angular, shadowed by 2 days of stubble. His eyes were the color of creek water in winter, pale, clear, and absolutely still. He wore a plain black thermal under his cut, sleeves pushed to the elbows, revealing forearms roped with veins and old scars that he never explained and nobody asked about. He was the road captain of the Iron Saints. He had held that rank for 9 years, which meant 9 years of deciding which roads the club rode, which routes were safe, which towns welcomed them, and which ones would call the sheriff before the engines cooled. But the title was just language. What Dane actually did was simpler and heavier than any title could carry. He protected. He absorbed. He placed himself between the people he loved and the things that wanted to destroy them, and he did it so quietly that most people never realized the danger had been there at all. He had not slept well in 20 years. Not since Rachel. Noah approached the table. His sneakers squeaked on the linoleum. The heavy man with the newspaper glanced up briefly, then returned to his reading. The younger one with the compass tattoo didn't look up at all. "Excuse me." Noah's voice was thin. Not weak. Thin. The voice of someone who had learned to take up as little sonic space as possible because volume attracted attention, and attention, in his experience, attracted pain. Nobody responded. "Excuse me," he said again. "I found something." Dane lifted his coffee mug, took a slow sip, set it down. His eyes moved to Noah with the unhurried precision of a man who assessed threats and dismissed them with equal calm. "Diner's got a lost and found," Dane said. His voice was low, flattened by years of speaking only when necessary. "Ask the waitress." "It's not from the diner." "Then it's not my problem." "It fell out of a truck, a black truck, at the old gas station." Something shifted. It was imperceptible to anyone who wasn't watching closely, but Noah was always watching closely. Dane's fingers tightened around the mug handle, just a fraction, just enough to turn the knuckles slightly pale. The man beside him, the one with the newspaper, lowered the paper half an inch and went still. "What fell out?" Dane asked. Noah placed the leather envelope on the table between 2 plates of half-eaten eggs. Dane stared at it for 3 full seconds without moving. The envelope sat there like an unexploded device, its brass snap catching the fluorescent light. Then he reached for it, unsnapped the flap, slid out the photograph. The diner continued around them. A waitress refilled a trucker's coffee at the counter. The refrigerator behind the kitchen pass hummed. Somewhere outside, a car door closed. The world moved forward because the world does not pause for the moments that shatter individual lives. Dane's face drained, not slowly, not gradually. The color left him the way blood leaves a wound, fast, total, and irreversible. His lips parted, but no sound emerged. His eyes locked onto the photograph with an intensity that was almost violent, as if he were trying to physically enter the image, to reach through the faded surface and pull something back from the other side of 2 decades. The man with the newspaper leaned over, looked at the photograph. His breath caught audibly. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Dane, that's—" "I know what it is." Dane's voice had changed. The flat calm was gone. What replaced it was something raw and unfinished, like a wound reopened in a place that had never properly healed. He turned the photograph over, read the handwriting on the back. His jaw clenched so hard that the muscles along his temples visibly jumped beneath the skin. "Where?" he said. He did not look at Noah. He stared at the photograph. "Where exactly did you find this?" "The old Sinclair station, mile marker 41. A black truck was parked behind the building. It pulled out heading west on Route 9. This fell from the bed." "How long ago?" "Maybe 20 minutes. I ran here." Dane finally looked up at Noah. The boy stood there in his oversized jacket, hands shoved into pockets that were fraying at the seams, his cheeks red from the cold and the run, his eyes steady with the particular alertness of a child who has spent his life being invisible and has compensated by seeing everything. "You ran 2 miles?" "Yes, sir." "In this cold?" "Yes, sir." Something passed across Dane's face that was too complex to name. Recognition, maybe. The recognition of one damaged person identifying another. He looked at the boy's worn shoes, the jacket that didn't fit, the way Noah held himself, shoulders slightly forward, weight on the balls of his feet, ready to move, the posture of someone who had been hit before and expected to be hit again. Dane stood. The movement was sudden enough that the mugs on the table trembled. Every iron saint at the table straightened simultaneously, a collective reflex born from years of reading their road captain's body language, the way sailors read weather. "Rooster," Dane said. The heavy man with the newspaper folded it immediately. "Get Bishop on the phone. Tell him I need every brother within 40 miles at the compound in 1 hour." "What do I tell him it's about?" Dane held up the photograph. His hand was shaking. Dane Calloway's hand did not shake. The men at the table saw it. They understood. "Tell him it's Rachel." The name moved through the group like an electrical current. Chairs scraped. Phones appeared. The younger man with the compass tattoo was already on his feet, pulling on gloves, heading for the door. Conversations in the diner paused as the bikers moved with the coordinated urgency of men responding to a signal that civilians could sense but not decode. "Start the bikes." Noah stood alone beside the empty booth as the Iron Saints filed past him, each one larger and more imposing than the last, leather and denim and boot leather, and the cold scent of highway wind. None of them looked at him. He was accustomed to not being looked at. He turned to leave. "Kid," Dane's voice stopped him at the door. "You got somewhere to be?" Noah considered the question. He considered it the way a 13-year-old considers it when the honest answer is nowhere, and the honest answer is also something he has never said out loud because saying it would make it permanent. "No, sir." Dane studied him for a long moment. Outside, engines were coughing to life, one after another, the deep, irregular thunder of machines that had been ridden hard and maintained harder. The sound filled the parking lot and pressed against the diner windows like a living thing. "Then you ride with me." The compound sat 12 miles north on a county road that hadn't been resurfaced since the previous decade. It was not a clubhouse in the way that movies portray clubhouses. No neon signs, no pool tables visible through open doors, no women in provocative clothing draped across furniture. The Iron Saints compound was a converted machine shop surrounded by a chain-link fence topped with razor wire. 2 large outbuildings, a row of storage containers along the back perimeter, floodlights on steel poles that cast the gravel yard in harsh white light that erased shadows entirely. The building itself was cinder block and corrugated metal, functional and unadorned, the kind of structure that existed to serve a purpose rather than make an impression. 23 bikes were already lined up when Dane's group arrived. More were coming. Noah could hear them in the distance, a low rolling thunder that seemed to approach from every direction at once, as if the roads themselves were converging on this single point. Inside, the main room was large, open, heated by industrial space heaters that made the air dry and metallic. A long wooden table dominated the center, scarred by years of use, coffee rings, knife marks, cigarette burns that had been there so long they had become part of the wood's identity. Folding chairs lined the walls. The American flag hung on one wall, faded. Beside it, a smaller banner with the Iron Saints crest, and beneath it, 7 names stitched in silver thread. Brothers who had not come home. Bishop arrived 15 minutes after Dane. He was the president of the Iron Saints, and he looked it, not because of size or visible menace, but because of the particular stillness that surrounded him. Marcus Bishop was 51, lean, with close-cropped salt and pepper hair, and a face that had been weathered by decades of sun, wind, and decisions that had kept him awake long after everyone else had surrendered to sleep. He wore his cut over a flannel shirt. His boots were steel-toed and scarred. He moved slowly, deliberately, and when he entered a room, the room reorganized itself around him without being asked. He looked at the photograph for 45 seconds. Then he looked at Dane. "You sure?" "That's our kitchen. That's the wallpaper my mother picked out. That's the dress Rachel wore to her kindergarten picture day." Dane's voice was controlled, but the control was costing him. That photograph was in a frame on the mantel. The night Rachel disappeared, the frame was found empty. The photograph was gone. The police said it was irrelevant. Police said a lot of things. Police said a lot of things that kept them from having to do their jobs. Bishop placed the photograph on the table and pressed his palms flat on either side of it, leaning forward, studying it the way a man studies a map before entering hostile territory. "Tell me about the truck." Noah spoke. He had been standing near the door, unsure whether his presence was permitted or merely tolerated. But when Dane nodded toward him, the boy stepped forward and delivered the details with a precision that silenced every man in the room. Black Ford. F150. Mid-2000s model. Aftermarket bed cover, partially retracted. Dented rear quarter panel, driver's side. License plate obscured by mud. Deliberate, not accidental because the front plate was clean. Faded registration sticker from Harlan County. Right taillight smashed and taped. Left taillight functional. Exhaust pipe hanging low, wired up with a coat hanger. The driver had a scar on his right hand, visible when he flicked the cigarette. He wore a dark cap pulled low. No visible passengers, but the truck sat heavy on its rear suspension, suggesting weight in the bed or the back seat. Silence followed. Rooster, the heavy man with the newspaper, whose real name was Dale Renner, a former Army mechanic who had served 2 tours and come home to a divorce, an empty house, and a bottle that nearly killed him before the club gave him a reason to put it down, looked at Noah with an expression that hovered between admiration and disbelief. "Kid's got eyes," he said quietly. "Kid's got more than eyes," Dane said. "He's got the only description of that truck that exists." Bishop straightened, looked around the room at the assembled brothers, mechanics, veterans, ex-convicts, men who had built lives from the wreckage of lives that the world had discarded. Men who rode because riding was the only honest conversation they knew how to have with a country that had stopped listening to them. 20 years, Bishop said. 20 years, Dane's sister has been gone. No body. No leads. Every agency that was supposed to look for her stopped looking. Every door he knocked on got closed in his face. And tonight, a 13-year-old kid walks into a diner and puts the only piece of evidence that ever mattered on the table. He paused. The space heaters hummed. "So here's the question. Do we ride?" There was no vote. There didn't need to be. The answer was in the way every man in the room was already standing. Dane pulled Noah aside as the room erupted into organized motion. Maps spread across the table, phone calls to contacts at truck stops and salvage yards, 2 brothers heading to the compound's garage to check tire pressures and fuel levels. "Your parents know where you are?" Noah's expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes closed, the way a door closes when someone on the other side has heard enough. "Don't have any." "Foster care?" "Was. Aged out of the last placement. They said I was difficult." He paused. "I wasn't difficult. I was quiet. They wanted kids who performed." Dane looked at the boy, looked at the jacket that didn't fit, the shoes that were falling apart, the steadiness in Noah's eyes that was not courage, not yet, but something older and more costly, the steadiness of a child who had stopped expecting rescue and had begun simply enduring. "When this is done," Dane said, "we're going to talk about where you sleep." I sleep fine. That wasn't a question. The search began at midnight. 16 bikes rolled out of the compound in staggered formation, headlights cutting through fog that had settled across the county like a gray wool blanket. Dane rode point. Noah sat behind Rooster on his touring bike, a pair of borrowed gloves swallowing his small hands, a spare helmet that was slightly too large pressing down on his forehead. The boy didn't complain. He didn't speak. He watched the road with the same careful attention that had captured every detail of the black truck, as if the highway itself might offer evidence that adults would ride past without noticing. They hit the Sinclair station first. Dane cut his engine and walked the perimeter while two brothers swept the interior with flashlights. The station had been closed for years, windows boarded, pumps removed, the concrete pad cracked and overtaken by weeds that had dyed brown in the autumn cold. Behind the building, tire tracks pressed into the soft gravel. Fresh. The tread pattern was distinctive, wide, aggressive, the kind of tire designed for hauling weight on unpaved roads. Rooster crouched beside the tracks and took photographs with his phone. "Commercial grade," he said. "These aren't stock tires. Someone put these on for a reason." Dane stood where the truck had been parked and turned in a slow circle. The station sat at the intersection of two county roads, one leading west toward the old mining towns that had been dying slowly since the mills closed in the 90s, the other heading north into timber country, where the roads narrowed and the cell towers ended and a person could disappear so completely that even satellites couldn't find them. "He was waiting here," Dane said quietly, "not passing through. Waiting. For what? For someone who didn't show." They rode west. At a truck stop outside Granton, a night shift attendant recognized the description. Black F-150, dented quarter panel, busted taillight. The truck had fueled up 3 hours earlier. The driver paid cash, didn't speak, bought a pack of cigarettes and a prepaid phone card from the rack beside the register. "Prepaid phone card," Rooster repeated. He and Dane exchanged a look that required no words. Prepaid cards meant disposable numbers. Disposable numbers meant someone who did not want to be traced. "Did he go inside?" Dane asked the attendant. "Just the counter, in and out, kept his hat low." "Which way did he turn when he left?" "West, same as before." They pressed deeper into the county. The roads grew narrower, darker, the painted lines fading into gravel shoulders that crumbled into ditches choked with dead leaves. The towns they passed through, if they could be called towns, were clusters of darkened buildings, closed storefronts, and streetlights that buzzed with insects despite the cold. Places where the economy had left decades ago, and the people who remained did so because leaving required a kind of energy they had already spent surviving. At a crossroads outside an unincorporated community called Dryden, Dane's phone rang. It was a brother named Stokes, a former corrections officer who had quit the system after witnessing too many things he couldn't change and had joined the Iron Saints because the club's version of justice, while imperfect, at least had the decency to be honest about its imperfections. Stokes had been making calls to contacts inside county records offices, pulling favors that would cost him later. "That registration sticker," Stokes said. "Harlan County. The truck's registered to a name that doesn't exist." "What do you mean, doesn't exist?" "I mean the name on the registration matches a birth certificate for a person who died in 1987. Infant death. Somebody took a dead baby's identity and built a paper trail with it." Dane pulled to the shoulder. The other bikes followed, engines dropping to idle, exhaust plumes rising in the cold air like the breath of sleeping animals. "That's not a petty criminal," Dane said. "No, that's infrastructure. That's someone with access to vital records, courthouse files, the whole machine. This isn't one guy with a fake ID. This is a system." The weight of the word settled over Dane like a second winter. A system. Rachel hadn't been taken by a desperate individual. She had been taken by something organized, layered, protected by the very institutions that were supposed to find her. Every detective who had closed the file. Every social worker who had signed off, every judge who had declined to issue a warrant. They weren't incompetent, they were complicit. He stood on the shoulder of that dark road, the photograph in his inside pocket pressing against his chest like a second heartbeat, and for the first time in 20 years, the grief that had calcified inside him began to crack, not into sorrow, but into something harder. something with edges. Noah appeared beside him. The boy had dismounted Rooster's bike without being told and walked over through the gravel with the quiet precision of someone accustomed to approaching dangerous animals. "The truck was heavy in the back," Noah said. "I told you that." "You did." "If it was carrying weight, and if the driver was using a dead person's name, then whatever was in that truck wasn't supposed to exist. Not the cargo, not the driver, not the route." Dane looked down at the boy. "How old are you again?" 13. "You talk like you're 40. "I listen like I'm 40. I just talk when it's worth talking." Dane almost smiled. Almost. The muscles in his face moved in that direction but stopped short, as if the machinery of joy had rusted from disuse and needed more force than he currently had available. His phone buzzed again. Stokes. "Dane, I pulled another thread. The Harlan County address on the registration? It's a freight depot. Closed since 2015, but the property tax has been paid every year since, by a shell company registered out of state. Name? Meridian Logistics Holdings. I can't find any employees, any contracts, any actual logistics. It's a ghost. A ghost that pays its taxes. A ghost that doesn't want anyone asking questions about an empty building." Dane ended the call and turned to Rooster. The big man was leaning against his bike, arms crossed, breath fogging in the cold. He didn't ask for the update. He waited. Rooster always waited. It was the quality Dane valued most in him, the patience of a man who understood that information arrives at its own pace, and demanding it faster doesn't make it more accurate. "We need to get to that depot," Dane said. "Tonight?" "Right now." "Dane," Rooster's voice was careful, "if this is what it's starting to look like, if there's a network, if there are people inside the system, then we're not just looking for a truck. We're kicking a door that somebody powerful nailed shut on purpose." "I know." "And you want to kick it anyway." Dane reached into his jacket and pulled out the photograph. He held it up in the pale glow of the motorcycle headlights. The faded image trembled slightly in the wind. A family on a porch, a boy who knew it wouldn't last, a girl who didn't get the chance to learn whether it would or not. "She was 6, Dane said. "She was wearing that dress because she was proud of it. She told everyone at school it was the color of strawberry ice cream." His voice cracked on the last word, and he let it crack, because pretending it didn't would have been a lie, and Dane Calloway had run out of lies 20 years ago. Somebody took her out of that house and made her disappear, and then they took this photograph and they kept it. They kept it like a trophy. And now it's in my hand because a kid with bad shoes and no home ran 2 miles in the cold to give it to a stranger. He put the photograph away. "So yes, I want to kick the door and I want to see what's on the other side." Rooster straightened, pulled on his gloves, threw a leg over his bike. "Then let's ride." The convoy turned north, 16 headlights in the darkness, moving together with the synchronized certainty of a formation that had been riding together through storms, funerals, and the kind of trouble that doesn't show up in police reports. The engines filled the empty county with sound, a deep, rolling, continuous thunder that made the windows of farmhouses vibrate and caused dogs chained in yards to lift their heads and go silent, recognizing something older and more serious than anything they had been trained to bark at. Noah pressed his face against Rooster's back and watched the tree line blur past. He had not been warm in weeks. He was warm now. The engine vibration traveled through the seat and into his bones, replacing the cold with a frequency that felt, absurdly and impossibly, like safety. He had learned long ago not to trust that feeling, but he held on to it anyway, just for now, just until the next thing came. The freight depot appeared at the end of a dirt access road that branched off County Route 7, like a vein leading to a dead organ. No signs, no markings, just a rusted cattle gate standing open, tire tracks leading through, and beyond them, the dark bulk of a corrugated metal building that sat against the tree line like something that had been placed there specifically to be forgotten. The bikers killed their headlights 200 yards out and rolled in under engine idle. Dane dismounted first. The depot was larger than it appeared from the road, a main structure with a loading dock, 2 smaller outbuildings, and a chain-link enclosure that might have once held vehicles or equipment. The loading dock doors were closed. A single security light on the corner of the building cast a cone of yellow illumination across the gravel apron, revealing fresh tire tracks that matched the tread pattern from the gas station. The truck had been here. Dane raised a fist. The formation stopped. Silence, except for the ticking of cooling engines and the wind moving through pine trees along the perimeter. "Rooster, take 3 brothers around the back, compass," the young man with the neck tattoo. "Take the east side. Nobody goes in until I give the word." Noah tugged on Dane's sleeve. "The brake line," the boy whispered. "What?" "On the truck. When it pulled out of the gas station, I saw fluid dripping from the undercarriage, near the rear axle. The brake line is damaged. If the truck left here recently, there will be a trail of fluid on the ground." Dane stared at him. "You saw brake fluid from behind a propane cage in the dark?" "It caught the light from the taillight, the working one. It was dripping steady, not a leak, a crack. The line's going to fail." Dane turned to Rooster. "The kid noticed a failing brake line from 50 yards in the dark." Rooster shook his head slowly. "I've had mechanics miss that on a lift." Noah didn't react to the praise. Praise was a currency he had never learned to spend. They approached the depot. The loading dock door was unlocked, not forced open, unlocked, as if someone had left in a hurry and had not bothered with security because they believed nobody was coming. Dane pulled the door up slowly, the metal groaning on its tracks, revealing a cavernous interior lit by the faint green glow of an emergency exit sign at the far end. The smell hit him first. Dust. Old paper. Cardboard. And beneath it, something else. Something faintly chemical, like toner or photocopy fluid, the scent of documents being produced in volume. Dane stepped inside and swept his flashlight across the space. Filing cabinets, dozens of them. Industrial gray, stacked too high along both walls, stretching the entire length of the building. A folding table in the center with a laminator, a stack of blank cardstock, and an inkjet printer with a paper jam frozen mid-feed. Beside the table, cardboard boxes, some open, some sealed with packing tape, labels handwritten in coded shorthand. Rooster came through the back entrance and stopped dead. "What the hell is this?" Dane opened the nearest filing cabinet, pulled a folder. Inside were documents, birth certificates, social security cards, driver's licenses, all bearing different names but sharing a common quality. They were perfect, not crude forgeries, not amateur work. These were documents produced by someone with access to legitimate templates, legitimate paper stock, legitimate seals. Documents that would pass inspection at any DMV, bank, or government office in the country. He opened another folder. Photographs. Children's photographs. School portraits, candid snapshots, images that had clearly been taken without the subject's knowledge. Each photograph was clipped to a sheet of paper bearing biographical details: age, hair color, eye color, distinguishing marks, last known location. His hands had started shaking again. He opened the third folder and felt the floor dissolve beneath him. It was labeled with a single name: Rachel Calloway. Inside was a file that spanned 20 years. Photographs of Rachel at various ages, 6, 10, 14, 18, 25, each one taken covertly. Medical records under false names. Employment records, addresses in 3 different states. And at the bottom, a single handwritten note in the same shaking blue ink as the writing on the back of the family photograph. "If you're reading this, I'm still alive. Find me. Please. I can't do this alone anymore." Dane's knees buckled. He caught himself on the edge of the filing cabinet, one hand gripping the cold metal, the other holding the note so tightly that the paper creased under his fingers. His breath came in short, ragged bursts. Not crying, not yet. Something before crying, something more fundamental, the sound of a man's entire understanding of the world being dismantled and rebuilt in real time. She was alive. Rachel was alive. She had been alive the entire time. And she had been leaving a trail, photograph by photograph, note by note, breadcrumb by breadcrumb, hoping that someone would follow it before the people who had taken her decided she was no longer useful. Noah stood in the doorway of the depot, silhouetted by the faint security light outside, and watched the biggest, toughest man he had ever met lean against a filing cabinet and shake. Then the boy's eyes moved to the gravel beyond the loading dock. Headlights. 3 vehicles moving fast, no sirens, no markings, coming straight for the depot. "Dane," Noah said. His voice was calm. Too calm for a 13-year-old. The calm of someone who had been cornered before and knew that panic was a luxury he could not afford. Someone's coming. The headlights cut through the darkness like three burning fingers reaching for the depot. Dane moved before his mind finished processing. He grabbed Noah by the collar of the oversized jacket and pulled the boy behind the nearest filing cabinet, pressing him flat against the cold metal. Rooster was already at the back entrance, one hand raised, signaling the brothers outside to kill every light, every phone screen, every cigarette ember that could betray their position. "How many?" Dane whispered. Noah peered around the edge of the cabinet. His breathing was steady. 13 years old, and his breathing was steady. 3 vehicles, 2 SUVs, dark color, 1 van. No plates visible from here. "You can see plates from this distance?" "I can see where plates should be. They're not there." The vehicle stopped 50 yards from the loading dock. Engines idling, high beams flooding the gravel apron with harsh white light that turned the dust particles into tiny orbiting planets. Nobody exited. The vehicles just sat there, breathing exhaust into the November air, waiting. Then a spotlight mounted on the lead SUV swiveled and pointed directly at the row of motorcycles parked along the perimeter fence. They knew. Dane's phone vibrated. Compass, texting from the east side of the building. 4 men out of the van. Armed. Moving toward the loading dock. Another vibration. A brother named Hardin, positioned near the cattle gate, 2 more behind us, cutting off the access road. They were being boxed in. Dane turned to Rooster. In the faint green glow of the emergency exit sign, the big man's face was a landscape of shadows and hard edges. His jaw was set. His hands were loose at his sides, not clenched, not panicked. The hands of a man who had been ambushed in worse places and had walked out breathing. "We can't fight this," Dane said. "Not here. Not with the kid." "I count at least 6, probably more in the SUVs. We go out the back, through the tree line. Bikes stay." Rooster hesitated. Leaving the bikes was like leaving limbs behind. But he looked at Noah, who was pressed against the filing cabinet with his eyes wide and alert, and the hesitation dissolved. "Go." They moved fast and low through the depot, past the rows of filing cabinets and the folding table with its laminator and printer, past boxes of stolen lives stacked like inventory in a warehouse of erased humanity. Dane grabbed 2 folders from the Rachel Calloway file and shoved them inside his jacket. He wanted to take everything. He couldn't. The math of survival was simple and cruel. Carry what you can, leave what you can't, come back when the odds improve. The back door opened onto a narrow strip of gravel that led to the tree line. Pine trees, dense and dark, their lower branches heavy enough to provide cover. Compass was waiting with 3 brothers, all of them crouched in the shadows, engines of adrenaline running hot behind controlled faces. "Hardin's cut off," Compass said. "He and Webb went over the fence on the south side. They're in the woods heading for the county road." "Everyone accounted for?" 16 rode in. I count 14 with us or confirmed moving. 2 missing, Pruitt and Gaines. They were checking the outbuildings. Dane's stomach dropped. Pruitt was 26, a kid from West Virginia who'd joined the club after 2 years of sleeping in his car following a dishonorable discharge that everyone in the club knew was unjust, but nobody outside the club cared enough to investigate. Gaines was older, 44, quiet, the kind of man who showed up to every funeral, every hospital visit, every 3 a.m. phone call, and never once asked for anything in return. "Can you reach them?" Compass shook his head. "Phones are dark. Either they're hiding or they've been found." A sound broke through the pine trees. Voices, sharp and commanding, coming from inside the depot. The men from the van had entered. Flashlight beams swept across the loading dock floor, visible through the gaps in the corrugated walls. "They'll find the cabinets open," Rooster said. "They'll know someone was here." "They already know. They saw the bikes." Dane made the decision in 2 seconds. 2 seconds was all the war inside his head required. Rachel's file against his chest, Noah beside him, 2 brothers unaccounted for, armed men in a building full of evidence that could expose a network spanning decades. "We move. Now. Compass, take the kid and 3 brothers west through the timber. Hit the county road and call for pickup. Rooster, you're with me. We circle back for Pruitt and Gaines." "Dane, that's not a discussion." Compass looked at Noah. The boy was shivering now, not from cold, but from the particular vibration of a body that has been running on adrenaline for too long and is beginning to understand that the danger is not abstract. It is real. It is here. It is carrying weapons. "Come on, kid," Compass said. He put a hand on Noah's shoulder. The boy flinched, involuntary, immediate, the reflex of someone whose shoulders had been grabbed in anger too many times. Compass noticed. He removed his hand and gestured instead. "Stay behind me. Step where I step." Noah looked at Dane. Something passed between them. Not words, not a promise, just the brief acknowledgement of two people who recognized that they had found something valuable in each other and were now being forced to separate before they could name it. "Go," Dane said. Noah went. The tree line swallowed them. Dane and Rooster moved along the perimeter of the depot, staying low, using the outbuildings for cover. The armed men had spread out. 2 remained inside the main structure. 2 more were circling the motorcycles, methodically photographing license plates with phone cameras. Professional. Unhurried. The behavior of men who expected no resistance because they had never encountered any. The first outbuilding was empty. Tools, a workbench, nothing more. The second outbuilding's door was closed, locked from the outside with a padlock that was newer than anything else on the property, shiny brass, recently installed. Dane pressed his ear to the metal door, breathing, heavy, panicked breathing from the other side. "Pruitt," Dane whispered. "That you?" A pause, then, "Dane. Yeah, it's us. They locked us in 5 minutes ago. 2 guys. You hurt?" Gaines took a hit. They cracked him with something when he tried to move. He's conscious, but his left eye's swelling shut. Rooster examined the padlock. Standard brass, hardened shackle. He reached into his vest and produced a compact bolt cutter that he carried the way other men carry wallets. Always, without thinking. Because experience had taught him that the difference between freedom and captivity often came down to the ability to cut through metal. 2 squeezes. The shackle snapped. The door swung open. Pruitt came out first, supporting Gaines, whose left eye was already purple-black and swollen to a slit. Blood had dried in a line from his eyebrow to his jaw. He was steady on his feet, but the steadiness was will, not wellness. "Can you move?" Dane asked. "I can move." "Can you run?" Gaines looked at him with his one good eye. "Brother, I've been running since I was 15. Started with my old man's belt, moved on to worse things. This ain't the thing that stops me." They ran. Through the tree line, branches whipping across faces and arms, pine needles underfoot muffling their steps. Behind them, a shout erupted from the direction of the outbuilding. Someone had found the broken padlock. More shouts followed. Flashlight beams began slicing through the trees like searchlights over a prison yard. They ran for 12 minutes before the trees thinned and the county road appeared, a strip of pale asphalt under a sky choked with clouds. Rooster pulled out his phone and called Compass. "Where are you?" "Quarter-mile west. Blue pickup truck pulled over." "Brother named Stokes called a friend. We've got a ride." They made it. The pickup was a farm truck, mud-caked, anonymous. Compass, Noah, and 3 brothers were already inside the bed, huddled against the cold. Stokes was behind the wheel. He drove without headlights for the first 2 miles, navigating by the pale ribbon of road and the instinct of a man who had spent his career memorizing routes in the dark. Nobody spoke. The silence was not empty. It was full of recalibrated fear, full of the knowledge that whatever they had stumbled into at that freight depot was bigger, older, and more dangerous than anyone had imagined. Full of the understanding that the people who had locked Gaines and Pruitt in that outbuilding had done so with the casual efficiency of men who had contained problems before and expected to contain this one. Gaines sat with his back against the cab, holding a rag to his eye, and stared at the sky. Noah sat across from him, knees drawn to his chest, and stared at Gaines. "Does it hurt?" the boy asked. Gaines managed a lopsided smile. "Compared to what?" They reached the compound at 3:14 a.m. Bishop was waiting. He stood in the gravel yard under the floodlights, arms crossed, his face carrying the particular expression of a man who had sent men out and counted every minute until they came back. He watched the truck pull in, counted heads, counted again. Saw the blood on Gaines's face and the dirt on everyone's jackets and the way Dane walked, stiff, coiled, the walk of someone carrying so much internal pressure that the wrong word could fracture him. "Inside," Bishop said. "All of you." The long table in the main room became a war council. Dane spread the 2 folders from Rachel's file across the scarred wood. Photographs, medical records, employment histories under false names, addresses spanning 2 decades and 3 states. And the note, Rachel's handwritten note, the ink smudged at one corner, the words small and precise and desperate. "If you're reading this, I'm still alive. Find me. Please. I can't do this alone anymore." Bishop read it twice. His jaw worked slowly, the muscles in his cheeks tightening and releasing with the rhythm of a man grinding his thoughts into manageable pieces. "This changes things," he said. "This changes everything." "That's what I mean." Bishop looked up. His eyes were steady, but the steadiness was constructed, built deliberately over the foundation of deep unease. "Dane, when you came to me about Rachel, I thought we were chasing a ghost. A truck, a photograph, maybe a cold trail that ends in another dead file. This," he tapped the folder, "this is a network. This is people with resources, people who locked our brothers in a building and put hands on Gaines." "I know what it is." "Do you?" "Because what I'm seeing here isn't a missing person case. It's a war. And I need to know, right now, at this table, whether the Iron Saints are riding into a war." The room was quiet. 23 men, breathing, waiting. Dane placed both hands flat on the table. "I'm not asking the club to go to war. I'm asking the club to help me find my sister." "Those might be the same thing." "Then they are the same thing." A voice from the far end of the table. Hardin, the brother who had gone over the fence at the depot. 48 years old, sun-damaged skin, a former long-haul trucker who had joined the Saints after his rig jackknifed in a snowstorm, and the company fired him while he was still in the ICU. "I need to say something." Bishop nodded. "We rode into that depot tonight with no intel, no plan, and no idea what was inside. We were lucky. Lucky nobody got shot. Lucky the kid," he gestured toward Noah, who was sitting in a folding chair against the wall, wrapped in a blanket someone had found, "didn't get hurt. But luck isn't strategy. And I need to know that the next time we ride with a plan. Because I have a daughter, she's 11, and I told her I'd be home for breakfast." The weight of the words settled across the room like snowfall. Heavy. Silent. Undeniable. Dane looked at Hardin. He saw the fear behind the man's eyes, not cowardice, never cowardice, but the legitimate terror of a father who understood that riding into unknown danger without preparation was not bravery, but recklessness. And recklessness was a luxury that men with children could not afford. "You're right," Dane said. "Tonight was reckless. That's on me. It's not about blame. Yes, it is. I saw that file and I stopped thinking. I saw her handwriting and I lost every piece of discipline I've spent 9 years building in this club." His voice cracked again, and he let it. "Hardin, you have every right to question me. Anyone at this table has that right. But I'm telling you, if we don't move on this, nobody will. The system that took my sister is the same system that was supposed to find her. The police buried it. The courts ignored it. And tonight we found proof that she's been alive this whole time, leaving signals, hoping someone would come." He held up Rachel's note. "She's waiting, and every day we spend planning is a day they spend erasing her." Silence. Bishop broke it. "Stokes, what do we know about the shell company?" Stokes leaned forward. He had a laptop open in front of him, the screen reflecting blue light across his tired face. "Meridian Logistics Holdings, registered in Delaware, no employees on record, no contracts, no revenue filings. But it owns properties, 6 of them, scattered across 4 states, all rural, all isolated, all purchased through intermediary buyers in cash transactions that were structured to stay below federal reporting thresholds. Somebody knows how to hide money. Somebody knows how to hide everything. I pulled property records on the depot. Previous owner was a county land trust that dissolved in 2010 after its director, a guy named Cleet Fosser, retired from the county assessor's office." Stokes paused. Let the implication breathe. County assessor, the guy who decides property values, the guy who controls land records, the guy who can make a building disappear from tax rolls. Rooster leaned back in his chair and rubbed his face with both hands. So we're looking at somebody inside county government. We're looking at somebody who was inside county government 20 years ago and built a machine that's still running. Dane pulled out his phone and opened the photographs Rooster had taken of the tire tracks at the gas station. The truck was at that depot tonight. The same truck that dropped the photograph, which means whoever was driving it is connected to Meridian, and whoever is connected to Meridian has access to Rachel. Or had access, Bishop said quietly. Dane, you need to hear this. The note says she escaped. If she escaped, they're looking for her. And if they found us at that depot tonight within hours of us finding it, then they're watching their properties. They've got cameras, sensors, contacts. We tripped something and they came running. So she's alone out there, running from the same people who just boxed us in. That's what I'm saying. The room felt smaller. The walls seemed to lean inward under the weight of what Bishop was describing. A woman alone, hunted, carrying decades of evidence against people who had the means and the will to erase her permanently. Dane's fist came down on the table. The sound was flat and heavy, like a judge's gavel. Coffee mugs jumped. The laptop screen flickered. Then we find her first. Bishop raised a hand. Not in opposition, in patience. We will. But we do it right. Stokes, I want full backgrounds on every property Meridian owns. Addresses, satellite images, access roads, everything. Rooster, take 2 brothers and go back to the depot at dawn. Not inside, just observe from a distance. I want to know if those vehicles are still there, if they moved the files, if they left people behind. Compass, you're on communications. New phones for everyone involved. Prepaid, cash only. We assume our regular lines are compromised. He turned to Dane. And you. Get some sleep. I can't. That's an order, Dane, not a request. You've been running on grief for 20 years, and tonight you got the first real answer you've ever had. I need you sharp, not wrecked. Sharp. Dane wanted to argue. Every cell in his body wanted to argue. Wanted to get back on his bike and ride into the dark and tear apart every empty building in the county until he found Rachel standing in one of them. But Bishop was right. Bishop was always right about the things Dane couldn't see when his own pain was blinding him. He nodded once, sat down heavily, pressed his palms against his eyes. Noah watched from the folding chair. The boy had been silent since the truck ride. Silent and watchful, absorbing everything. The argument, the tension, the strategic planning, the way men who loved each other could disagree without destroying each other. He had never seen that before. In every foster home, disagreement had been a precursor to violence. Raised voices led to raised hands, always, without exception. Here, raised voices led to plans, solutions, the redistribution of responsibility among people who trusted each other enough to be honest about their fear. It was the most disorienting thing Noah had ever witnessed. Rooster noticed the boys staring and walked over, crouched down so they were eye level. The big man's knees cracked like dry wood and he winced, a reminder that the body he demanded so much from was beginning to submit its invoices. You hungry? Noah considered lying, decided against it. Yeah. Come on, kitchen's in the back. It's not fancy, but the coffee's strong and there's bread and peanut butter. I like peanut butter. Good, because that's about all we've got. Rooster led him through a narrow hallway to a small kitchen, industrial sink, ancient refrigerator, a coffee maker that looked like it had been in continuous operation since the previous century. He made Noah a sandwich with the careful attention of a man whose hands were more accustomed to torque wrenches and engine blocks, but who understood that feeding a hungry child was its own kind of mechanical precision. Noah ate in silence. Rooster leaned against the counter and drank coffee and watched the boy with the expression of someone performing a slow, painful calculation. Where have you been sleeping? Rooster asked. Around. Around where? Bus station in Granton. Sometimes the library if I get there before it closes. There's a heating vent behind the Dollar General on Route 6 that runs all night. Rooster's coffee mug stopped halfway to his mouth. He set it down very slowly, as if moving too fast might break something. Not the mug, but something inside himself. A heating vent. It's not bad. The grate gets warm enough if you put cardboard under you. Rooster turned his face away. He looked at the wall. He looked at the calendar hanging on the wall, which was 3 months behind and featured a photograph of a mountain lake that nobody in this building had ever visited. He looked at these things because if he looked at Noah, he would have to confront the fact that a 13-year-old boy was sleeping on cardboard over a heating vent in November, and the world had simply allowed it. "Okay," Rooster said. His voice was thick. "Okay, here's what's going to happen. There's a couch in the back room. It's ugly, but it's clean. You're going to sleep on it tonight. Tomorrow, we figure out the rest. You don't have to..." "Kid, I spent 2 years sleeping in a tent in a desert because my country told me it was important. Then I spent another year sleeping in a parking garage because that same country forgot I existed when I came home. I know what it's like to have nowhere, and I know what it costs." He picked up his coffee mug, took a long sip, set it down. "Nobody in this building is going to let you sleep on a heating vent. That's not how we work." Noah's jaw tightened, not in resistance, in the effort of not crying. He finished his sandwich. Rooster led him to the back room, a small space with a battered couch, a wool blanket, and a space heater that glowed orange in the darkness. Noah lay down and pulled the blanket to his chin and stared at the ceiling. He did not sleep, but for the first time in months, he closed his eyes without fear. In the main room, the planning continued. Stokes had pulled satellite imagery of the 6 Meridian properties. 3 were in neighboring states, too far for immediate action. The remaining 3 were within a 100-mile radius. 1 was the freight depot they had already found. The second was a rural parcel outside a town called Halloran, registered as agricultural land but showing structures on the satellite image that didn't match any farming operation. Multiple buildings arranged in a compound pattern with a gravel access road and what appeared to be a communications tower. The third property was listed at an address that didn't appear on any commercial map. "Off-grid," Stokes said, "deep in the national forest. The access road isn't maintained. No power lines, no water utility, no mail delivery. Whatever's out there, it's completely self-contained." Bishop studied the satellite image. Dense tree cover. A clearing barely visible through the canopy, something metallic reflecting sunlight in one corner of the frame. "That's where you hide someone you don't want found," Bishop said. Dane was sitting at the table, Rachel's note in front of him, reading it for the 15th time. Each reading carved the words deeper into him, the way water carves stone, not through force but through relentless repetition. "I can't do this alone anymore." "She wrote this recently," he said. "The ink is fresh. The paper isn't yellowed. She wrote this knowing it would be found with the photograph, knowing the photograph would lead back to her. She planned this." "She planned for you," Stokes corrected. "Nobody else would recognize that family photo. She wasn't sending a message to the police or the FBI or some anonymous tip line. She was sending it to her brother." Dane pressed his fingers against the bridge of his nose. The pressure behind his eyes was enormous, not tears, something larger than tears, something structural, as if the architecture of his identity was being renovated without his consent, and the walls were groaning under the new weight. "Why now?" he asked. 20 years, why now?" Nobody answered, because nobody had an answer, and because the question contained within it another question, darker and more urgent. What had changed in Rachel's captivity that made escape after 2 decades suddenly possible or suddenly necessary? At 4:30 a.m., Dane's phone rang. It was an unknown number, prepaid, untraceable. He answered, static, then breathing, then a voice, male, calm, measured, the voice of someone accustomed to controlling conversations the way a conductor controls an orchestra. "Mr. Calloway." Dane went rigid. "You visited our property tonight. That was unwise." Every man in the room stopped moving. Bishop stepped closer, pressing his ear near the phone. Rooster positioned himself by the window and scanned the yard outside. "Who is this?" Dane said. "That's not the important question. The important question is what you took from that building. You removed documents that belong to people who do not appreciate having their records disturbed. Those records are evidence of kidnapping, of identity theft, of nothing, Mr. Calloway. Those records don't exist. That building doesn't exist. And in approximately 48 hours, neither will the digital trail your friend has been following." A pause. Stokes, isn't it? Former corrections officer, divorced, lives alone on Birch Lane, drives a blue Silverado. The room went cold. Stokes's face drained of color. He looked at Dane. He looked at Bishop. He looked at the laptop screen glowing in front of him and understood, with the sickening clarity of a man who has just realized he is standing in a trap, that every search he had conducted, every database he had accessed, every query he had entered had been watched, monitored, cataloged. Here is what happens next, the voice continued. You return the documents you took. You stop your searches. You go back to your little compound and you ride your motorcycles and you pretend tonight never happened. In exchange, nothing happens to your friend on Birch Lane. Nothing happens to the man with the injured eye. Nothing happens to the 13-year-old boy you brought into a situation he has no business being in. Dane's hand tightened around the phone until the plastic creaked. And Rachel? Silence. Rachel is not your concern. Rachel is my sister. Rachel is a liability, and liabilities are managed. You know this, Mr. Calloway. You've spent 9 years managing liabilities for your club. The only difference is that we operate at a different scale. The line went dead. Dane stood motionless, the phone still pressed to his ear, listening to the silence that followed like the silence after a detonation. Absolute, ringing, permanent. Bishop took the phone from his hand, gently, the way you take a weapon from someone who might use it on themselves. They know everything, Stokes said. His voice was barely audible. They know where I live. They know my truck. They know about Noah. They know because they're inside the system, Dane said. That's what the depot proved. They don't just use fake documents. They control the infrastructure that creates real ones. County records, law enforcement databases. Everything. Hardin stood up from his chair. His face was gray. They threatened my family. They didn't say it directly, but that's what they did. They know about the boy. They know about Gaines. They know about Stokes. He looked at Bishop. President, I asked for a plan. This isn't a plan. This is a countdown. Hardin, 48 hours. That's what he said. 48 hours before they erase the digital trail and we lose everything. And if we don't return those documents, people in this room get hurt. People who have families. The room divided. Not physically. Nobody moved. But the division was palpable. A fracture running through the center of the brotherhood like a crack in a windshield. On one side, the men who looked at Dane and saw a brother whose sister needed saving. On the other, the men who looked at their phones and saw photographs of their children and calculated the cost of heroism against the price of restraint. Bishop felt the fracture. He had felt fractures before. They were the president's burden, the constant awareness that brotherhood is not a permanent state, but a daily negotiation between individual survival and collective purpose. Nobody's giving those documents back, Bishop said. His voice carried the weight of finality. And nobody's going home to wait for a phone call from someone who threatens children. Then what do we do? Hardin asked. Bishop looked at Dane. Dane looked at the note on the table. I can't do this alone anymore. We have 48 hours, Dane said. In 48 hours, they erase everything. The records, the properties, the trail. Rachel becomes a ghost again. Permanent this time. He stood. The chair scraped against the floor with a sound like a bone breaking. So we don't wait. We don't plan for next week. We move in 48 hours with everything we have. We find Rachel before they make her disappear. And if it's a trap? Rooster asked from the window. Then it's a trap. But she's inside it, and I'm not leaving her there. Bishop scanned the room. Every face. Every set of eyes. He was looking for the vote that no one would formally call, the silent consensus that happens when men who have bled together must decide whether to bleed again. He saw it. Fear, exhaustion, anger, determination, and underneath it all, the stubbornness of men who had been broken by the world and had rebuilt themselves around a single principle. You don't abandon your own. 48 hours, Bishop said. Stokes, go dark. Clear your apartment tonight. Anything that matters, take it. Anything they can use, burn it. You're staying here until this is done. Rooster, dawn surveillance on the depot. I want to know if they're clearing it out or reinforcing it. Compass, I want eyes on that off-grid property in the national forest. Don't approach. Just confirm it exists and report back. Hardin. Bishop paused. The man with the 11-year-old daughter stood rigid, his hands at his sides, his face a battlefield of competing loyalties. Take your family somewhere safe. Your sister's place in Knoxville. Tonight. Don't tell anyone where you're going. Come back when this is over. Hardin opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. I'm not running. You're not running. You're protecting your daughter the way we're protecting Rachel. Different battlefield, same war. Hardin stared at Bishop for a long moment. Then he nodded, turned, walked to the door, stopped with his hand on the frame. Find her, he said without turning around. Find her, so this was worth it. The door closed behind him. Dane sat back down at the table and spread the stolen files across the surface. Rachel's photographs stared up at him. 6 years old, 10 years old, 14, 18, 25. A life documented in stolen frames, each image taken without her knowledge, each one a violation disguised as record-keeping. But the most recent photograph was different. It had been taken within the last year. Rachel, a woman now, 36 years old according to the timeline, standing outside a wooden structure that could be a cabin or a maintenance building. She was thinner than she should have been. Her hair was pulled back, her clothes were plain, utilitarian, but her eyes were looking directly at the camera, not caught unaware. Looking, deliberately, defiantly, as if she knew she was being photographed and wanted whoever was watching to know that she knew. Dane held the photograph under the overhead light and studied the background. Trees, dense timber, a slope rising behind the structure, and in the far corner of the frame, partially obscured by the cabin's roofline, the edge of something metallic and tall. A communications tower, the same kind of structure visible in the satellite imagery of the Halloran property. Stokes, Dane said. Stokes was already looking at his screen, already cross-referencing, already pulling the thread that connected the photograph to the satellite image to the property records, to the shell company, to the network that had stolen Rachel Calloway from a farmhouse porch 20 years ago and had kept her ever since. It's the Halloran compound, Stokes said. The background matches. The tree line, the slope, the tower. She was at that property when this photograph was taken. Dane placed his finger on Rachel's face in the photograph, touched the image the way you touch something fragile and irreplaceable, with the full weight of tenderness compressed into the lightest possible pressure. That's where she is, he said. That's where she was, Bishop corrected. The note says she escaped. Then that's where she escaped from, and that's where they'll go back to look for her. The compound was quiet now. Most of the brothers had dispersed to their assignments, phones to destroy, families to move, routes to scout. The space heaters hummed, coffee cooled in mugs. The clock on the wall read 5:12 a.m. In the back room, Noah lay on the couch with his eyes open, listening to the muffled voices through the wall. He could not hear the words, but he could hear the cadence, the rhythm of men making decisions that would determine whether someone lived or died. He had heard similar rhythms before, in foster homes where caseworkers spoke in low tones about placements and terminations and the bureaucratic language of children being moved like furniture from one room to another. But this rhythm was different. This rhythm carried weight. Not the weight of procedure, but the weight of conviction. These men were not following protocols. They were following a person, a real, specific, living person who had asked for help. Noah pulled the blanket tighter and stared at the orange glow of the space heater, its warmth pressed against his face like a palm. He thought about the photograph, the family on the porch, the boy who had known it wouldn't last. That boy was Dane. Dane at 10 years old, standing on the edge of a loss he could feel coming but couldn't name. Noah understood that boy. He had been that boy his entire life. Outside, the first gray light of dawn crept across the compound. Frost covered the motorcycles in the yard, turning chrome to silver and leather to stone. A crow landed on the fence post by the gate and cried once, a harsh metallic sound that carried across the empty gravel like a warning broadcast on a frequency only the desperate can hear. 48 hours. The clock had started, and somewhere out there, in the cold timber country between forgotten towns and unmarked roads, a woman named Rachel Calloway was running. Running from the people who had owned her for 20 years, running toward a brother she hadn't seen since she was 6. running with evidence that could bring down an empire built on stolen children and erased lives. She didn't know that her brother had found her signal. She didn't know that 16 men on motorcycles had already bled for her. She didn't know that a 13-year-old boy with worn-out shoes and nowhere to sleep had started all of it by picking up a photograph on a cold highway and running 2 miles to deliver it to a stranger. All she knew was that the people hunting her had just discovered she was gone, and they were sending everyone they had to find her before she could reach the one person on Earth who would burn the world down to bring her home. The rain started at 6 a.m. Not a drizzle, not a warning. The sky opened like a wound and the water came down in sheets that hammered the compound's metal roof with a sound like continuous gunfire. The gravel yard turned to mud within minutes. The motorcycles parked along the fence became dark shapes beneath the downpour, chrome swallowed by gray, leather darkening to black. Dane had not slept. He sat at the long table with Rachel's files spread in front of him, his eyes raw, his jaw tight, a mug of coffee that had gone cold 3 hours ago sitting untouched beside his right hand. The overhead fluorescent light hummed with the high-pitched whine of a bulb near the end of its life, casting everything in a pale, sickly wash that made the photographs look like artifacts recovered from a disaster. He had been staring at the same page for 40 minutes. It was a medical record, one of the false name documents from Rachel's file. A visit to a clinic in Whitfield, West Virginia, dated 14 months earlier. The patient name read Sarah Hollis. The diagnosis was malnutrition and untreated fractures in the left wrist consistent with repetitive injury. The attending physician's notes, scrawled in nearly illegible handwriting at the bottom of the page, contained a single sentence that Dane had read so many times the words had ceased to function as language and had become instead a physical sensation, a blade pressed flat against his sternum. Patient shows signs of prolonged captivity and chronic abuse. Recommend immediate referral to authorities. Beneath that, a stamp. File transferred to county supervisor per administrative directive. No referral, no authorities. The file had been transferred, absorbed, buried, redirected into the same system that had swallowed Rachel in the first place. A doctor had seen her, had documented what was happening, and someone above that doctor had reached down and closed the file like closing a coffin lid. Dane's fist clenched so slowly that the motion was almost imperceptible. His knuckles whitened. The tendons in his forearm stood out like bridge cables under load. He held the tension for 10 seconds. 15. Then he released it, opened his hand, and placed his palm flat on the medical record as if he could somehow transmit warmth through the paper, through time, through the 14 months that separated this moment from the moment his sister had sat in a clinic with broken bones and been sent back to the people who broke them. The front door banged open. Compass came through the entrance dripping wet, his leather cut dark with rain, his boots leaving muddy prints on the concrete floor. His face carried the expression of a man who had seen something he was still trying to process. Not shock exactly, but the cousin of shock, the precursor, the moment before the mind finishes assembling the picture. "We need to talk," Compass said. "Talk." "Not here. In the garage, just you and Bishop." The garage was a separate structure connected to the main building by a covered walkway. Inside, 3 bikes sat in various stages of maintenance, surrounded by tool chests, hydraulic lifts, and the permanent smell of motor oil and welding flux that had soaked into the concrete floor over decades. Rain drummed on the metal roof. A single shop light hung from a rafter, swinging slightly in the draft from a cracked window, making the shadows shift and resettle with each oscillation. Bishop was already there, leaning against a workbench with his arms crossed. Compass closed the door behind them. "I drove out to the Halloran property," Compass said, 2 hours before dawn, parked a mile out and walked in through the timber like you said. Observation only. And? The compound is real. 4 structures. Main building, 2 smaller ones, and a generator shed with a diesel tank. Communications tower on the north end. Chain link perimeter with razor wire. Security cameras on every corner, the kind you can't buy at a hardware store. Military grade. Infrared capable. Bishop's expression didn't change. Active? Very active. 2 vehicles in the yard, lights on in the main building. I counted 3 men patrolling the perimeter in shifts. Armed. Sidearms, and at least 1 rifle I could see. "So it's not abandoned," Dane said. "It's a fortress." Compass paused. He ran a hand over his shaved head, wiping away rain that continued to drip from his scalp. His compass rose tattoo flexed on his neck. But that's not what I need to tell you. He reached into his cut and produced a folded piece of paper, a photograph printed from a phone camera, grainy but legible. I used a telephoto lens from the tree line. This is the gate. The photograph showed the compound's main entrance, a metal gate with a keypad lock. And beside the gate, mounted on a post, a small plaque. The image was blurred at the edges, but the center was clear enough to read. Dane took the photograph and held it under the shop light. The plaque read, Meridian Logistics Holdings, Property Manager, P. Raines. Dane read the name 3 times. Each time, the letters rearranged themselves in his mind, searching for a configuration that didn't mean what he knew it meant. They refused. P. Raines, he said. Patrick Raines. Bishop straightened from the workbench, his arms uncrossed slowly, the deliberate decompression of a man whose body was responding to a threat before his voice could name it. Dane. Patrick Raines was the lead detective on Rachel's case. The shop light swung. Shadows moved across the walls like restless ghosts. He was the one who came to our house the night she disappeared. He sat at our kitchen table. He drank my mother's coffee. He told her they would find Rachel. He told her to trust the process. Dane's voice was flat. Not calm, not controlled, but flat in the way that a surface is flat after something catastrophic has leveled everything that once stood upon it. He worked the case for 6 months, filed reports, conducted interviews. Then he closed it. Insufficient evidence, no leads, case cold. Dane, he closed it because he knew where she was. He knew where she was because he was the one who put her there. The rain intensified. The sound on the roof became a roar, white noise that filled the garage and pressed against the walls and made the silence between the 3 men feel like a physical object, a boulder dropped into the center of the room that they would have to move before anyone could breathe normally. Bishop spoke first. Are we certain? P. Raines, property manager. Meridian Logistics Holdings, the same company that owns the depot where we found Rachel's file. Dane held the photograph up. His hand was steady now. The shaking had stopped. Something inside him had shifted. The grief was still there, but it had been pushed to the periphery by something colder, something with machinery, something that operated with precision rather than passion. He retired from the department 12 years ago, moved out of state. Nobody questioned it because nobody questions a retired cop. Except he didn't retire, Compass said. He relocated. To manage the properties where they keep the people they've taken. Dane set the photograph on the workbench, placed his palms on either side of it, leaned forward until his face was inches from the grainy image of the plaque bearing the name of the man who had sat at his family's table and promised to find his sister while knowing exactly where she was. He watched my mother die, Dane said. Did you know that? She called him every month, every single month for 8 years, asking if there were new leads, asking if anyone had seen Rachel, and every month he told her no. He told her to keep hoping. He told her these cases take time. His voice cracked, not with sorrow, but with something mechanical, something breaking under strain. She died believing nobody was looking for her daughter. She died believing the world had forgotten Rachel, and the man she trusted, the man she called her last hope, was the one who made Rachel disappear. Bishop moved to Dane's side, not touching him, standing close enough that their shoulders nearly met, occupying the same space, sharing the same air, because sometimes proximity is the only language strong enough to carry the weight of what words cannot hold. We're going to get him, Bishop said, but we need more. One name on a plaque isn't enough to bring down a network. I don't need to bring down a network. I need to find my sister. They're the same thing now, and you know it. Dane pushed off the workbench, turned, paced the length of the garage, 6 steps one direction, 6 steps back, the rhythm of a caged animal whose cage has just become visible. He passed the bikes on their lifts, the tool chests, the welding equipment, the detritus of a world built on mechanical competence and manual labor, and the belief that broken things could be fixed if you understood their components. Stokes, he said. Stokes can pull Raines's full history, property records, financial accounts, associates. If Raines was the property manager for Meridian, there's a paper trail. There's always a paper trail. Stokes is dark, Bishop said. We told him to go dark. Then we bring him back. And risk the people who threatened him? They already know everything, Bishop. They called my phone. They knew Stokes's address, his truck, where the kid sleeps. Going dark doesn't hide us from people who were never looking from the outside. They're inside. They've always been inside. The only advantage we have is speed. Bishop studied him. The president's eyes were the kind of eyes that had seen lies told convincingly and truths told badly, and had learned to distinguish between them not by the words, but by the cost the speaker paid to deliver them. Dane was paying. Every sentence cost him something: a shred of control, a fraction of the armor he had built around the wound of Rachel's absence. He was dismantling himself in real time, and Bishop had to decide whether the man standing in the wreckage was more dangerous or more capable than the man who had been standing in the armor. "Bring him back," Bishop said. The next 3 hours moved like machinery. Stokes returned to the compound with a duffel bag of essentials and a laptop wiped of everything except the tools he needed. He sat up at the long table and began building the architecture of Patrick Rain's second life, the life that existed beneath the retired detective, the life that connected him to Meridian Logistics Holdings and the properties where stolen people were stored like inventory. What he found was worse than anyone expected. Rains had not acted alone. The financial records, accessed through a contact Stokes maintained inside a regional banking cooperative, a favor that would cost him a bottle of bourbon and a debt he would carry for years, showed a network of payments flowing through Meridian to individuals across multiple counties and states, monthly deposits, consistent amounts, the kind of payments that looked like salaries because they were salaries, compensation for services rendered in the business of making people disappear. "I'm counting 14 recipients," Stokes said. His voice had the flat monotone of someone narrating a disaster in progress. 14 people receiving regular payments from Meridian. Some are names I recognize. County clerks, a records supervisor in the state capitol, 2 former law enforcement. "Former?" Bishop asked. "One retired. One was removed for misconduct, but the details were sealed by a court order that, here's the thing, was signed by a judge who is also on this list." The room absorbed this information the way soil absorbs poison, slowly, completely, with consequences that would not become visible for some time, but were already spreading through the root system. Rooster stood at the window, watching the rain. He had returned from his dawn surveillance of the freight depot 40 minutes earlier with news that confirmed the worst. The depot was being emptied. 2 box trucks had arrived overnight. Men were loading the filing cabinets into the trucks. The evidence was being moved, erased, scattered across locations that might never be found. "They're accelerating," Rooster said without turning from the window. "The 48-hour window they gave us? They're not waiting. They started the moment they hung up that phone." "How much was left when you pulled out?" Dane asked. "Maybe half. They were moving fast, but there was a lot of material in there. 20 years of records doesn't fit in 2 trucks." "Where are they taking it?" "I followed one truck for 12 miles before it turned onto a private road heading into the national forest, same direction as the off-grid property." Dane and Bishop looked at each other. The off-grid property. The one that didn't appear on any map. The one surrounded by dense timber and military-grade security cameras. Everything was converging on that location. The evidence, the personnel, and if Dane's instincts were correct, whatever remained of the operation that had consumed his sister's life. "They're consolidating," Dane said, "pulling everything into one location. One place they can control, defend, and if necessary, destroy," Bishop finished. "Including Rachel's trail. Including everything." Noah appeared in the doorway between the hallway and the main room. He had been in the back room, ostensibly sleeping, but his eyes were clear and alert, and his posture carried the specific tension of someone who had been listening through walls. "The brake line," he said. Everyone looked at him. "The truck from the gas station. The one that dropped the photograph. Its brake line was cracked. I told you that." He stepped into the room, his borrowed socks sliding slightly on the concrete floor, his oversized jacket hanging from his frame like a flag on a still day. "If they're using that truck to move files, it's going to fail, especially on mountain roads, especially in the rain." Rooster turned from the window. "Kid's right. A cracked brake line under load on a wet grade, that truck's a disaster waiting to happen." "Or an opportunity," Dane said quietly. The room shifted. The energy realigned around a possibility that nobody had spoken yet, but everyone felt. The possibility that the same vehicle which had delivered Rachel's signal might become the means of reaching her. But before the thought could take shape, Stokes's laptop emitted a notification tone that cut through the room like a blade. He leaned forward, read again. His face changed, not gradually but all at once, the way a landscape changes when lightning reveals what darkness had been hiding. Oh no. What? I set up an alert on Patrick Raines's name across public records, social media, news feeds, court filings. Stokes turned the laptop so the screen faced the room. This was posted 40 minutes ago on the County Sheriff Department's official page. The screen showed a press release. Brief, official, devastating. The County Sheriff's Department announces the appointment of Patrick Raines as special consultant to the County Task Force on Missing and Exploited Persons. Mr. Raines, a retired detective with extensive experience in missing person investigations, will advise the task force on cold case methodology and evidence management. Dane read it 3 times. Each reading was a detonation, a sequential demolition of every assumption he had carried, that the system was merely indifferent, that the corruption was confined to the past, that retiring from the department meant Raines had retreated from his position of power. He hadn't retreated. He had been promoted. The man who had orchestrated the kidnapping and erasure of Dane's sister had just been officially appointed to oversee the very type of investigation that should have found her. He would now have direct access to every missing person case in the county, every file, every lead, every witness. He would be the wall between the victims and the truth. "He's not hiding," Dane said. His voice was barely above a whisper, but it carried the density of lead. "He's not running. He's moving forward. He's putting himself inside the system again because he knows that the best way to prevent an investigation is to be the investigation." Bishop sat down slowly. The action was uncharacteristic. Bishop never sat during crises, preferring the authority of vertical posture, the readiness of a man on his feet. But he sat now because what Stokes's screen displayed was not merely a complication, it was a transformation of the entire battlefield. They were no longer investigating a criminal network that operated in shadows. They were confronting a network that had just placed its architect inside the machinery of law enforcement in daylight, with official sanction. "If we go to the police now," Rooster began. "We go to him," Dane finished. "Every report we file goes to his desk. Every piece of evidence we submit goes through his hands. Every name we identify gets flagged in his system." "Then we don't go to the police," Compass said. "We were never going to the police. The police are the problem. They've been the problem for 20 years. Noah moved closer to the table. His eyes were on the laptop screen, on the press release, on the official photograph of Patrick Raines that accompanied the announcement. A man in his mid-60s with silver hair and a jaw that projected competence and authority. A face designed to be trusted. A face that had been sitting across from grieving families for decades, absorbing their pain, documenting their hope, and filing it all in cabinets that would never be opened. "He looks like a grandfather," Noah said. Nobody responded, because the boy had identified the precise mechanism of Raines's power. The ability to look like the thing you are supposed to trust, while being the thing you should fear most. Dane pulled out his phone, scrolled through contacts until he found a number he hadn't called in 4 years. A number belonging to a woman named June Harlow, a former investigative journalist who had spent 3 years researching corruption in county law enforcement before her newspaper was purchased by a holding company and her position was eliminated and her files were confiscated during the transition. She had been looking for the same pattern. She had been shut down. Dane pressed call. 3 rings, 4, 5. A voice answered, cautious, tired, the voice of someone who had stopped expecting calls that mattered. "June, it's Dane Calloway." Silence. Then, "Dane, it's been years. I found something connected to my sister's case, and I think it's connected to everything you were working on before the paper shut you down." A longer silence. In it, Dane could hear the faint static of a cheap phone connection and the distant sound of a television playing in another room and the particular quality of breathing that belongs to a person deciding whether to step back into a fire they barely survived the first time. What did you find? Patrick Rains, the detective who ran Rachel's case. He's connected to a company called Meridian Logistics Holdings. They own properties where... He stopped, looked at Bishop. Bishop nodded. Where they keep people, stolen identities, forged documents, children who disappeared and were never found. And Rains was just appointed to the county task force on missing persons. You already know. I've been watching him for 6 years, Dane. From a distance. Without resources, without a platform, without anyone who believed me. Her voice hardened, not with anger, but with the metallic edge of validation, the sound of a person who had been called paranoid and was now being told they were right. I have files. Not much. They took most of it when the paper was sold, but I kept copies. Physical copies, hidden. What's in them? Enough to prove that Rains didn't just close cases. He redirected them. Families who were getting too close to the truth, their files would suddenly be transferred to other jurisdictions. Witnesses who came forward would be discredited. Tips that should have been investigated were logged and archived and forgotten. She paused. Dane, I found 17 cases over 15 years where the investigation pattern was identical. Same detective, same methodology, same outcome. Case closed, insufficient evidence. 17. That I could confirm. There could be more. Probably are. Dane closed his eyes. 17 families. 17 mothers calling every month. 17 lives swallowed by the same machine that had swallowed Rachel. And at the center of it, a man who smiled in official photographs and shook hands at community events and carried the title of public servant like a disguise sewn from stolen skin. I need those files, June. I need protection, Dane. I need to know that what happened before doesn't happen again. They didn't just close my newspaper. They came to my apartment. They took my laptop. They left a note on my kitchen counter that said, "Drop it." 2 words. No signature. The lock wasn't broken. They had a key. Come to the compound. We'll keep you safe. A motorcycle club is going to keep me safe from people who have keys to my apartment and access to law enforcement databases? A motorcycle club already found more in one night than every agency in this county found in 20 years. We're not asking for permission, we're not filing reports, and we're not stopping. Another silence. This one lasted long enough that Dane thought she had hung up. I'll bring the files, June said. But Dane, there's something else. Something I never published because I couldn't confirm it, and because confirming it would have gotten me killed. What? Rachel wasn't the only one who tried to escape. 5 years ago, another person from one of those 17 cases got out. A woman named Clara Voss. She was taken when she was 9, in 2001. She escaped from a property in the National Forest and made it to a gas station off Route 12. Called the police. And? The responding officer was Patrick Rains' former partner, a man named Boyd Ulrich. He took Clara into custody for her own protection. June's voice dropped to nearly nothing. She was never seen again. Dane's grip on the phone tightened until his knuckles turned to bone beneath the skin. The system doesn't fail these people, he said. The system is designed to catch them when they run. Now you understand what you're up against. The call ended. Dane set the phone on the table and stood motionless for a full minute. The rain continued its assault on the roof. Stokes's laptop glowed. The brothers present, Rooster, Compass, Bishop, Stokes, and 3 others, watched their road captain and waited for the detonation they could see building behind his eyes. It didn't come. Instead, something worse. Something quieter. The slow, deliberate reconstruction of a man who had just watched the last wall of his former understanding collapse and was now building a new structure on the rubble. A structure with no room for mercy, no room for negotiation, no room for the belief, which he had carried, despite everything, for 20 years, that somewhere inside the system, someone with authority was trying to help. Nobody was trying to help. Nobody had ever been trying to help. The system was the cage. The people running it were the captors, and every time a victim escaped, the system recaptured them and returned them to the darkness with the efficiency of a machine whose only purpose was to ensure that the darkness remained unbroken. Change of plan, Dane said. Bishop straightened. We don't have 48 hours. We never did. That phone call wasn't a warning. It was a stall. They needed time to consolidate, appoint reins, and build a wall of official authority between us and Rachel. By this time tomorrow, anything we bring forward, any evidence, any testimony, any name, goes through a system that Reigns controls. So what do? We go to Halloran? Tonight? Not reconnaissance, not observation. We go in and we take everything, every file, every hard drive, every piece of evidence in that compound, and we find out where Rachel went when she escaped. That compound is guarded, Compass said. Armed men, security cameras, one road in, one road out. Then we don't use the road. Dane, Compass, I'm not asking you to die. I'm asking you to ride. There's a difference, and it's the only difference that matters right now. Rooster stepped away from the window. His face was wet, not from rain, but from something he would never admit to and no one would ever mention. He crossed the room and stood in front of Dane, close enough that their boots nearly touched. I'm in. I know. Not because of Rachel. I mean, yes, because of Rachel, but also because of Clara Voss and the 17 families, and every name in those filing cabinets that nobody ever came for. He paused. I joined this club because I was done watching systems break people and call it procedure. If we ride tonight, I ride. One by one, the others spoke. Not speeches, not declarations, single words, nods, the tightening of jaws and the straightening of spines, the silent vocabulary of men who had made their decision and needed only to confirm it aloud for the benefit of the historical record, the record that lives not in documents, but in the memories of the men who were present when the choice was made. Bishop spoke last. We ride at dark, full complement. Anyone who needs to make a phone call, make it now. After sunset, phones go off, and they stay off. The room emptied. Men moved to their bikes, to the garage, to the armory, a locked storage room where the club kept the tools of emergency preparedness that nobody discussed in polite company, and everyone understood existed because the world, despite its pretensions of civility, occasionally required responses that civility could not provide. Dane remained at the table. Noah stood across from him. The boy looked different in the gray light of the rainy afternoon. Older, harder. The softness that children are supposed to carry had been scraped away by months of sleeping on heating vents and eating from gas station shelves and navigating a world that had decided he was not worth the effort of protecting. You can't come, Dane said. I know. Not because I don't trust you, because if something goes wrong, I need to know you're safe. Nobody's been worried about whether I'm safe since I was 8 years old. Noah said it without self-pity, without drama, with the matter-of-fact delivery of someone stating a temperature reading. But I understand. I'll stay. Rooster will be here. Rooster's riding with you. I heard him. Dane exhaled. The boy heard everything, saw everything, processed everything with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned that information was the only currency that could not be taken away. June Harlow is coming, the journalist. She'll be here before dark. Stay with her. Help her organize the files. You notice things other people miss. That's not a compliment. That's a fact. Use it. Noah nodded. Dane. Yeah. The photograph. The one I found on the highway. Rachel dropped it on purpose. She knew the truck's route. She knew it passed that gas station. She knew someone might find it. He paused. But she couldn't have known I'd be there. She couldn't have planned for that. No. So she dropped it, hoping, just hoping, that someone would pick it up and care enough to bring it to someone who mattered. Dane looked at the boy for a long moment. She dropped it hoping for exactly what happened. And what happened was you. Noah's chin trembled once. He locked it down, swallowed hard, turned away and walked to the back room without another word. Dane watched him go. Then he pulled Rachel's note from his pocket and read it one final time. If you're reading this, I'm still alive. Find me. Please. I can't do this alone anymore. He folded the note carefully, placed it in the inside pocket of his cut, against his chest, above his heart. The rain hammered the roof. Engines were being started in the garage. The deep, irregular rumble of machines being awakened for a ride that would not follow mapped roads or legal speed limits or any of the conventions that separate orderly society from the raw, unregulated territory where the only law is the willingness to act when every institution has failed. At 4:17 p.m., June Harlow arrived at the compound in a rusted sedan with 3 boxes of files in the trunk. She was 52 years old, sharp-featured, exhausted in the specific way of a person who had spent 6 years being right about something terrible and being punished for it. She carried the boxes inside, set them on the long table, and looked at the Iron Saints files already spread across the surface. "You found more in one night than I found in 3 years," she said. "We had help." Dane looked toward the back room. A kid with good eyes. June opened the first box. Inside were folders, notebooks, photocopies, printed emails, and a USB drive taped to the interior lid. Everything I saved. 17 cases, interview transcripts, financial records I copied before they took my laptop, and something else. She pulled a folder from the bottom of the box. Thick, worn at the edges, a rubber band holding it closed. Boyd Ulrich, Raines's former partner, the one who picked up Clara Voss. What about him? He died 8 months ago, heart attack. At least that's what the death certificate says. But I spoke to the paramedic who responded. Off the record, he said the body showed signs of acute chemical exposure. He filed an addendum to his report. And? The addendum disappeared from the system within 24 hours. Dane stared at her. They killed their own man. They killed a liability. That's what they do. That's what they told you on the phone, Dane. Liabilities are managed. The compound was silent, except for the rain and the sound of men preparing for something that did not have a name but had a shape. The shape of an ending, one way or another. At 6:43 p.m., the sky was black. The rain had not stopped. 22 Iron Saints stood in the gravel yard beside their machines, helmets in hands, faces set against the weather, and the knowledge of what waited at the end of the road they were about to ride. Bishop walked the line, not inspecting, acknowledging, looking each man in the eye, nodding, receiving the nod in return. The oldest ritual in the oldest language of men who have chosen to stand together in the space between the world that is and the world that should be. He reached Dane at the front of the formation. Anything changes out there, we adapt. No heroes, no martyrs. We go in, we get what we came for, and we come home. And if Rachel's there, then we bring her home too. Dane pulled on his helmet, threw a leg over his bike, turned the ignition. The engine caught and roared, and the sound was swallowed immediately by 21 other engines igniting in sequence, a cascading thunder that rolled across the compound and into the surrounding darkness like a declaration of intent that required no translation. Dane looked back at the compound one last time. Through the rain-streaked window of the main building, he could see Noah standing at the long table beside June Harlow, already sorting files, already working, already doing the only thing a 13-year-old boy with nowhere to go and everything to prove could do to help bring a stranger sister home. The boy looked up. Through the glass, through the rain, through the distance, their eyes met. Dane raised a fist. Noah raised one back. Then the throttle opened and the formation moved. 22 headlights cutting through black rain on a road that led into the mountains where a compound waited, where guards patrolled, where decades of stolen lives were being consolidated and prepared for destruction, and where a woman named Rachel Calloway had spent 20 years waiting for the sound of engines coming to bring her out of the dark. They rode toward Halloran with the knowledge that what they were about to do could not be undone. That crossing the perimeter of that compound would transform them from civilians into combatants, from concerned citizens into outlaws, from a motorcycle club into something the system they were fighting would use every resource to destroy. And in the back pocket of Dane's jeans, folded beneath the leather of his cut, Rachel's note pressed against his spine like a hand reaching through time. I can't do this alone anymore. She wouldn't have to. Not after tonight. The mountain road twisted upward through black timber like a wound that refused to close. Rain hammered the asphalt in sheets so dense that the headlights of 22 motorcycles could only cut 15 feet into the darkness before the water swallowed them. The road had no guardrails, no reflectors, no center line visible beneath the downpour. On the left, the mountain wall rose straight up, raw rock slick with runoff. On the right, nothing. A drop into tree canopy and darkness that went down far enough that falling would give a man time to think about every decision that had brought him to this edge before the ground arrived to end the conversation. Dane rode point. His hands were numb inside wet gloves. His jaw ached from clenching against the cold. Rain found every seam in his leather, every gap between collar and skin, running down his spine in thin lines that felt less like water and more like fingers. The fingers of the mountain itself, pressing against his vertebrae, testing whether the man on this machine was committed or merely moving. He was committed. Behind him, the formation held. 21 headlights in staggered pairs, the bikes leaning into each curve with the collective precision of men who had ridden together through weather that would have sent civilian riders to the shoulder hours ago. Nobody pulled off. Nobody slowed. The engines spoke to each other through the rain, a continuous rolling dialogue of RPM and exhaust note that communicated speed, distance, and intent more efficiently than any radio. Compass's voice crackled through the Bluetooth earpiece Dane wore beneath his helmet. 2 miles to the turnoff, county road ends and it goes to gravel. After that, another mile to the perimeter. Lights? Kill them at the gravel. We go dark from there. They had studied the satellite imagery for 3 hours before departing. Bishop had drawn the approach on a topographic map using a grease pencil. The compound sat in a shallow valley between 2 ridges, accessible by a single gravel road from the south. The northern side backed up against a steep slope thick with old-growth timber. The eastern perimeter bordered a dry creek bed that ran with seasonal water. The western side was open ground, 60 yards of cleared land between the tree line and the chain-link fence. 60 yards, open, no cover. Anyone crossing that ground under the security cameras would be visible from the moment they left the trees until the moment they reached the fence, unless the cameras weren't functioning. That was Stokes's contribution. Before they left the compound, he had spent 40 minutes on a phone call with a contact he would not name. A person who, Stokes said, owed him something that could not be repaid with money and had agreed to settle the debt with a different currency. At exactly 9:15 p.m., a targeted electromagnetic pulse would be directed at the communications tower on the Halloran compound. The pulse would disable the security cameras, the alarm system, and any electronic surveillance for approximately 8 minutes before backup generators restored power. 8 minutes. 8 minutes to cross 60 yards, cut through chain link, and breach the perimeter before the eyes came back online. The gravel turnoff appeared through the rain like a mouth opening in the hillside. Dane signaled. 22 headlights died simultaneously. The world collapsed into sound and sensation. The crunch of tires on wet gravel, the rumble of engines dropped to idle, the rain's percussion on helmets and leather and metal, and beneath it all the accelerating rhythm of 22 heartbeats synchronized by the shared knowledge that the next hour would be the most dangerous hour any of them had ever lived. They parked the bikes in a stand of pine trees 300 yards from the compound perimeter. The gravel road continued ahead, curving through the timber toward the front gate. Dane could see it in the distance. The faint glow of security lights bleeding through the rain, the dark outline of the communications tower rising above the trees, like a skeletal finger pointing at a sky that had no stars. Bishop moved through the group, assigning positions with hand signals and whispered words that were nearly lost in the weather. Rooster, take 6 brothers through the creek bed. Approach from the east. When the cameras go down, you hit the fence. Wire cutters, fast and quiet. Rooster nodded. His face was unreadable beneath the rain, a mask of water and determination and the particular steadiness of a man who had been through worse and had decided somewhere in the depths of his biography that fear was a sensation he acknowledged but did not obey. Compass, take 4 brothers along the northern ridge, high ground. You're overwatch. If anyone tries to leave through the back, you stop them. How? However you need to. Dane. Bishop turned to his road captain. You, me, and the rest go through the western clearing. Front door. 60 yards in the open. 8 minutes without cameras. And if the cameras come back early? Then we're already inside and it doesn't matter. Dane checked his watch. 9:09. 6 minutes until the pulse. 6 minutes of standing in cold rain beside men who had families and mortgages and unfinished conversations waiting for them at kitchen tables they might never see again. 6 minutes of silence that was not empty but overfull, packed with the compressed energy of lives that had been building toward this moment without knowing it, the way rivers build toward waterfalls without the water understanding what happens at the edge. Dane, it was Pruitt, The young brother from West Virginia, 26 years old, who had been locked in the outbuilding at the depot and had not complained once about it since. He stood in the rain with water streaming down his face and his hands steady at his sides. "Thank you," Pruitt said. "For what?" "For coming back for us. At the depot. You could have kept running. You came back." "That's not something you thank someone for. That's just what you do." "Not where I'm from. Where I'm from, people keep running." Dane looked at the young man, saw, behind the rain, and the bravado, and the cut that was still newer than anyone else's, the ghost of the boy who had slept in his car for 2 years because the system that was supposed to catch him when he fell had instead pushed him over the edge and walked away. "You're not where you're from anymore," Dane said. 9:13. 2 minutes. The rain intensified. The wind shifted direction, coming now from the north, carrying with it the smell of pine resin and wet earth, and something faintly metallic, the smell of the compound itself, of generators and chain link, and the industrial reality of a place built not for habitation, but for containment. Dane breathed. In, out, in, out. Each breath was deliberate, a decision, a refusal to let the body's panic override the mind's purpose. He had learned this technique not from training manuals or meditation seminars, but from the simple, brutal experience of sitting beside hospital beds and grave sites and courtroom benches, where the only thing separating function from collapse was the conscious decision to keep breathing. 9:14. 1 minute. He thought about Rachel, not the photograph, not the file, not the handwriting on the note. He thought about Rachel at 6 years old, sitting on the kitchen floor with a box of crayons, drawing pictures of horses that looked nothing like horses, but that she insisted were perfect. He thought about the way she laughed, full body, uninhibited, the laugh of a child who had not yet learned that the world punishes vulnerability. He thought about the last time he saw her, standing in the doorway of their shared bedroom in pajamas with small yellow flowers on them, waving goodnight with a hand so small it couldn't fully close around the doorframe. That was the last image. 20 years of nightmares, and the last image was always that hand, that wave, that doorway. 9:15. Nothing happened. For 3 seconds, nothing happened. And in those 3 seconds, Dane felt the floor of his certainty begin to crack, felt the doubt seep in through the fractures, the doubt that the contact was real, the pulse was real, any of this was real. Then every light in the compound went dark. The security floods, the interior lights visible through windows, the blinking red indicators on the camera housings, the communications tower's navigation beacon. All of it gone, swallowed by the same darkness that surrounded them, as if the compound had been erased from the landscape by the hand of the storm itself. "Go," Bishop said. They ran. Dane's boots hit the open ground and the mud grabbed at every step, sucking at his soles, trying to hold him in place. The rain was blinding. He couldn't see the fence. He couldn't see the men running beside him. He could only hear them. Boots, breathing, the jangle of tools against leather, the controlled chaos of bodies moving at maximum speed through minimum visibility toward a target they could no longer see, but knew was there because they had memorized its position the way sailors memorize coastlines. 20 yards. His lungs burned. The cold air tore at his throat like broken glass. His hands were fists inside the wet gloves, every finger clenched, every tendon loaded. 40 yards. A shape materialized from the rain, chain link, razor wire across the top, glistening with water. Dane reached the fence and a brother was already there with bolt cutters, the blades biting through the links with sharp metallic snaps that were swallowed by the storm. A section of fence peeled back. Dane pushed through, feeling the cut wire catch his jacket and drag across his forearm, drawing a line of heat that he registered and dismissed in the same instant. He was inside. The compound was a collection of shadows. The main building, a long, low structure with a flat roof and no windows on the ground floor, sat 30 yards ahead. The 2 smaller buildings flanked it on either side. The generator shed was behind the main structure, and Dane could hear its diesel engine cycling, the backup system warming up, preparing to restore power. "How long?" he hissed into the earpiece. 5 minutes left," Stokes's voice replied from the compound where he was monitoring from a laptop connected to a satellite phone. Maybe less. The backup generator's already cycling. 5 minutes? Maybe less. Dane sprinted toward the main building. Bishop was beside him. 3 brothers fanned out toward the flanking structures. Behind them, Rooster's group was coming through the eastern fence. Dane could hear the snap of bolt cutters and the splash of boots through the creek bed. The main building's door was steel, locked. No keypad. The electronic lock had died with the cameras. But the door was secured by a manual deadbolt as well. The kind of redundancy that people install when they trust technology but trust paranoia more. The brother beside Dane, a man named Fenton, 40 years old, former iron worker, who had hands like industrial vices and a disposition so quiet that new members sometimes forgot he existed until they needed something broken, stepped forward and examined the lock for 2 seconds. Then he placed a pry bar between the door and the frame, set his feet, and pulled. The frame splintered, the door swung open. Inside was darkness, complete. The kind of darkness that has texture, thick velvet pressing against the face like a cloth. The smell hit Dane immediately, stale air, chemical cleaning agents, paper, and beneath everything, the faint organic scent of human habitation. People lived here, or had lived here. The building was not an office or a warehouse. It was a dwelling, a cage designed to look like a dwelling. Flashlight beams cut the dark. The interior revealed itself in fragments, a corridor with doors on both sides, concrete floor, fluorescent fixtures dead in the ceiling. The walls were painted institutional green, the same shade used in schools and hospitals and detention centers, the color of systems that process human beings rather than sheltering them. Dane moved down the corridor. The first door was open. Inside, a small room. A cot, a metal desk, a single chair. No window. A camera mounted in the upper corner of the ceiling, its red indicator light dark. The room was empty but recently occupied. The cot's blanket was rumpled. A glass of water sat half full on the desk. And on the wall beside the cot, barely visible in the flashlight beam, someone had scratched letters into the paint with a fingernail. Days. Tallied in groups of 5, like a prisoner counting time. The tally ran for several rows. Dane's chest seized. He forced himself to move. The second room. Same layout, same cot, same camera. This one had a small shelf with 3 books. Worn paperbacks, their spines cracked from repeated reading. On the floor beside the cot, a pair of shoes. Women's shoes. Size 7. The third room was locked from the outside. Dane stepped back and Fenton hit the door with his shoulder. It burst inward. The room was different, larger. A table instead of a desk, covered with papers. Handwritten notes, printed maps, lists of names, dates, locations. A sleeping bag on the floor, not a cot. And on the wall, a map of the surrounding area with routes marked in red pen, distances calculated in the margins, and a single word written in capital letters at the bottom. Out. This was Rachel's room. Not her cell, her planning room. The room where she had spent months, maybe years, documenting the operation, studying the geography, measuring distances, calculating escape routes. She had turned her captivity into a surveillance operation. She had become the investigator that the system refused to be. Dane picked up the papers from the table with hands that were shaking again, that were always shaking now, that might never stop. Names, dates, details of arrivals and departures, descriptions of guards, their rotations, their habits, their weaknesses, the truck routes, the depot locations, the financial structure, everything organized with the meticulous precision of someone who understood that evidence was the only weapon available to a person without freedom. "Bishop," Dane said into the earpiece. His voice was barely controlled. "I found her room. She documented everything, the entire operation. It's all here. Grab it, all of it. 3 minutes." 3 minutes. Dane swept everything from the table into a waterproof bag that Rooster had given him before the ride. Papers, notebooks, maps. He pulled the map from the wall, folded it, shoved it inside. He turned to leave, and saw the photograph. Taped to the back of the door, hidden when the door was open, visible only when the door was closed or, as now, when it had been knocked inward. A photograph. Not the family portrait, a different one. A picture of a woman standing outside this very building, looking directly at the camera with eyes that held 20 years of captivity and defiance, and the particular kind of strength that doesn't announce itself because it doesn't need to. Rachel, current, alive, standing in front of this building, and beside her, partially visible at the edge of the frame, another person. A woman. Younger, dark hair. Looking at Rachel with an expression of absolute trust. On the back of the photograph, written in Rachel's handwriting, Clara, still alive. We go together. Clara Voss, the woman who had escaped 5 years ago and been recaptured by Boyd Ulrich. The woman June Harlow said was never seen again. She was here, she had been here. She was with Rachel. They had escaped together. Dane's hand was on the photograph when the lights came back on. Fluorescent fixtures buzzed to life overhead, flooding the corridor with harsh white light. The cameras in the corners of the rooms began their startup sequences, small red lights blinking, lenses adjusting. Somewhere deep in the building, an alarm began to pulse. Not a siren, but a low rhythmic tone, like a heartbeat amplified through speakers. The tone of a system waking up and discovering that its perimeter had been violated. "Time's up," Stokes said through the earpiece. "Cameras are live. I can see movement on the access road, 3 vehicles inbound. How far?" 4 minutes. Maybe 3. Dane ran. He burst through the corridor and out the shattered front door into the rain, where the compound was now illuminated by the restored security floods, white light turning the rain into silver streaks and the mud into a gleaming mirror that reflected everything with cruel clarity. Brothers were pouring out of the flanking buildings, carrying boxes, hard drives, laptops. Rooster emerged from the eastern structure with a filing box under each arm, his face streaked with sweat and rain and something dark that might have been grease or might have been blood. "What'd you find?" Dane shouted. "Server room. 3 computers still warm, hard drives pulled. Everything else was already packed. They were in the middle of clearing out when we hit. They knew we were coming. They suspected. Didn't expect us this fast." Headlights appeared on the access road. 3 sets, moving fast, bouncing on the gravel. Bishop's voice cut through the rain. "Everyone out! East fence, now!" The retreat was controlled but urgent. The precise, practiced evacuation of men who understood that holding ground was only valuable when the ground was worth holding, and right now the only thing worth holding was the evidence in their hands and the lives carrying it. They moved through the cut fence and into the creek bed, boots splashing through shallow water, boxes and bags held above their heads. Behind them, the vehicles reached the compound. Doors opened, voices, sharp, commanding, the voices of men arriving at a crisis. A flashlight beam swept the western clearing and found the cut fence. "They're through the fence! East side!" Footsteps. Running, splashing. Dane pushed the brothers ahead of him, staying at the rear, the last man through the creek bed, the last man into the tree line. Behind him, he could hear pursuit, boots on gravel, the crack of branches, the metallic sound of weapons being handled. Then a sound that changed everything. An engine. Not a vehicle. Not a motorcycle. A diesel engine. Heavy, laboring, the unmistakable growl of a large truck climbing a mountain road at speed. The black truck. Dane recognized the sound, not consciously, the way you recognize a voice you've heard in nightmares. The engine had a particular knock, an arrhythmia in its combustion cycle that gave it a limping rhythm. He had heard it described by Noah in the diner. The boy had noticed the exhaust pipe wired up with a coat hanger, the vehicle running rough. The truck appeared on the access road below the compound, its single working headlight cutting through the rain like a wounded eye. It was moving fast. Too fast for the road conditions, too fast for the grade, too fast for the weight it was carrying. The rear suspension was compressed almost to the axle stops, loaded with whatever had been cleared from the depot. And in that single working headlight, Dane saw the brake line. The fluid trail. Dark drops on the wet road surface, visible for only an instant before the rain washed them away. Noah's observation, the cracked line, the failing brakes, the truck that was a disaster waiting to happen. On a mountain road. In the rain. Loaded with evidence, moving too fast. The truck reached the compound and didn't stop. It accelerated. Past the gate, past the buildings, past the vehicles that had just arrived. It was heading for the north end of the compound, where a secondary road, barely more than a logging trail, climbed into the higher mountains. Dane understood instantly. The driver wasn't coming to reinforce the compound. The driver was evacuating, taking the most critical evidence, whatever had been prioritized from the depot, to a secondary location higher in the mountains where it could be destroyed. The truck, Dane said, it's running. Bishop was beside him in the tree line, breathing hard, rain pouring off his helmet. Let it go, we've got enough. Not enough. That truck is carrying 20 years of evidence, birth certificates, photographs, identities, every person they ever took. He looked at Bishop, including Clara Voss, including others we don't know about yet. Dane, we have people chasing us. Then you handle the people. I'm handling the truck. He was running before Bishop could respond, running through the trees, parallel to the logging trail, his boots slamming through undergrowth and over fallen timber. The rain made the ground treacherous, branches whipped across his face. He could hear the truck grinding up the trail 50 yards to his right, its engine straining, tires spinning on the wet surface, the vehicle fighting the grade and the mud and the weight, and its own deteriorating mechanical integrity. The trail curved. Dane cut the angle, crashing through a stand of young pines, and emerged on the logging road 30 yards ahead of the truck. He stood in the headlight. The truck's single eye found him, and the driver hit the brakes. Nothing happened. The brake pedal went to the floor. Dane could see it through the windshield, the driver's leg extending, foot pressing down, the pedal offering no resistance. The brake line had failed, completely. The truck continued forward under its own momentum, slowing only slightly on the uphill grade, the engine still pushing, the transmission still engaged. Dane didn't move. The truck closed. 20 yards. 15. The driver's face was visible now, a man in his 50s, thin, sharp-featured, wearing a dark cap pulled low, the scar on his hand, the same hand Noah had seen at the gas station. The man's mouth was open, his eyes wide, his free hand pulling the emergency brake lever with the desperation of someone who has just realized that the machine he trusted has betrayed him. The emergency brake caught. Metal screamed against metal. The rear wheels locked and the truck began to slide. Sideways, slowly, the front end swinging toward the edge of the logging trail where the ground dropped away into darkness. Dane dove. He threw himself to the left as the truck slid past, close enough to feel the heat from the engine, close enough to smell the burning brake pads, close enough to see the driver's eyes lock onto his for a fraction of a second, a moment of contact between the man who had driven the truck that carried a stolen girl's photograph and the brother who had spent 20 years looking for her. The truck's front wheel went over the edge. The vehicle tipped, slowly at first, the physics of a heavy object on an unstable surface negotiating with gravity, then faster. The cab tilted. The bed rose. The cargo shifted with a heavy sliding sound, and the truck rolled onto its side with a crash that sent debris and mud spraying across the trail. Then it stopped, balanced on the edge, half on the road, half over the drop. The engine died. The single headlight pointed at the sky. Steam rose from the radiator. The rain continued to fall. Dane picked himself up from the mud. His left shoulder was on fire. He'd landed on a rock and the impact had done something structural, something he would pay for later, but could not afford to acknowledge now. He limped to the truck. The driver was conscious, trapped behind the steering wheel in the sideways cab, suspended by his seatbelt, blood running from a cut above his eye. He looked at Dane through the cracked windshield with the expression of a cornered animal, calculating, desperate, dangerous. "Open the door," Dane said. "Go to hell. You're on the edge of a cliff in a truck with no brakes. Open the door or I leave you here." The driver reached for something beneath his seat. Dane saw the movement and slammed his palm against the cracked windshield. The glass spiderwebbed further, but held. "Don't," Dane said. His voice was quiet, quieter than it had been all night. The quiet of a man who had passed through anger and come out the other side into something more precise. "I don't want to hurt you, but I will stand here and watch you go over that edge without blinking, and I need you to understand that I am not exaggerating." The driver's hand stopped. He looked at Dane's face, looked at the eyes, read whatever was written in them, and made his calculation. His hand came back empty. "Who sent you to the gas station?" Dane asked. "Nobody sent me. I was making a run." "The photograph. My family's photograph. How did you have it?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "The leather envelope. It fell from your truck at the Sinclair station. A kid found it. That kid brought it to me. And now I'm standing on a mountain in the rain asking you questions that you're going to answer because the alternative is I walk away and let physics finish what your brake line started." The truck creaked, shifted, half an inch towards the edge. The driver's eyes went wide. "Rains," the driver said. "Rains gave it to me, told me to transport it with the files from the depot to the Halloran compound." "Why did Rains have my family's photograph?" "Because she gave it to him." Dane's blood stopped. "What?" "The woman, Rachel, she gave it to him last year, told him she wanted to cooperate, told him she'd stop trying to escape if he'd let her keep one personal item. He took the photograph instead, said he'd hold it as insurance." "Insurance against what?" "Against her talking, against her documenting the operation, against exactly what she ended up doing anyway." The driver coughed, blood in the spit. "She played him. She told him what he wanted to hear, and she spent the next 12 months writing down everything, every name, every route, every dollar. She knew the operation better than any of us because she'd been inside it for 20 years. "Where is she now?" The truck shifted again, a grinding sound, metal against stone. The balance was failing. "I don't know. She left 3 weeks ago, her and the other one, Clara. They went out through the creek bed at night. By the time anyone noticed, they were gone." "Where would they go?" "I don't know. Think harder. There's a logging camp, old one, abandoned, 15 miles north, past the ridge. She asked about it once, casual, like she was making conversation. But Rains noticed. He flagged it, sent people to check it out. They didn't find anything." The driver's voice was weakening. The blood from his forehead was getting into his eye. "But that was 2 weeks ago. Before the photograph surfaced. Before the kid. Before you. Rains sent people to that logging camp. He sent people everywhere. He's been looking for her around the clock since she escaped. Every road, every property, every contact. He wants her back because she's the only person alive who can identify every node of the network, every buyer, every seller, every government contact." The truck tilted, sharply. The driver screamed, short, involuntary. The sound of a body that understands gravity is about to win. Dane reached through the broken window, grabbed the man's jacket, pulled. The driver came through the window frame in a tangle of limbs and broken glass, his jacket tearing, his shoulder dislocating with an audible pop as Dane hauled him onto the road surface. They collapsed together in the mud as the truck, relieved of his weight, shifted its center of gravity and slid over the edge with a sound like the earth exhaling, slow, grinding, final. It crashed through timber. The sound traveled down the mountainside in decreasing echoes. Then silence. Then rain. Dane lay on his back in the mud, breathing. The driver lay beside him, groaning, clutching his shoulder. The sky above was black and featureless and endless. Footsteps. Rooster appeared on the trail, breathing hard, flashlight in hand. "Dane, you alive?" "Barely." "The truck?" "Gone." Rooster looked over the edge, shook his head, then looked at the driver on the ground. "Who's this?" "The man who was driving the black truck, the one Noah saw at the gas station." Dane sat up. Every muscle in his body screamed. He ignored them the way he had ignored pain for 20 years, not by pretending it didn't exist, but by acknowledging it and deciding it was less important than the next task. "He says Rachel and Clara escaped 3 weeks ago. He says Rains has been searching for them since. And he says there's an abandoned logging camp 15 miles north where Rachel might have gone." Rooster extended a hand. Dane took it. The big man hauled him to his feet with the casual strength of someone who had been lifting broken things his entire life. 15 miles north, Rooster repeated, through mountain terrain, in this weather, with Rains's people already searching. "So we're not done. We're not done." Behind them, the compound was chaos. Flashlights, vehicles, voices. But the Iron Saints had already vanished into the timber with their evidence, boxes of files, hard drives, Rachel's entire documented operation. Bishop was organizing the retreat through the creek bed, his voice steady in the earpiece, guiding brothers through the dark with the patient authority of a man who understood that survival was a collaborative project, not an individual achievement. Dane walked down the trail toward the bikes. Each step sent a jolt of pain through his injured shoulder. Each step brought him closer to the next ride, the next road, the next mile between him and the logging camp where a woman who had survived 20 years of captivity might be waiting in the rain for a sound she had spent her entire adult life trying to hear. The sound of engines, the sound of someone coming. At the bikes, the brothers reassembled. Wet, exhausted, some bleeding from cuts sustained during the breach. Gaines, his eye still swollen from the depot, had a new laceration across his forearm from the fence wire. Pruitt's hands were raw from carrying equipment through the timber. Every man carried damage. Every man stood upright. Bishop did a head count. 22 departed. 22 returned. He looked at Dane. The logging camp. 15 miles north. Tonight? Dane looked at the men around him. Men standing in rain and mud in their own blood. Men who had just breached a guarded compound and fought their way out and were now being asked to ride further into the mountains on roads that might not exist toward a location that might be empty. He couldn't ask them. He could not stand here and ask these men for more. Rooster stepped forward. I didn't ride through all that to go home now. Compass. I'm in. Fenton, Pruitt. Gaines with his one good eye. Brother after brother stepping forward or nodding or simply throwing a leg over their bikes because the question had already been answered somewhere deep in the architecture of who they were. Men who rode not because it was safe, but because someone at the end of the road needed them, and need was the only compass they had ever followed that pointed true. Bishop mounted his bike, turned the engine, looked at Dane through the rain. 15 miles, he said. Lead the way. 22 engines fired into the mountain darkness. Dane opened the throttle and the formation surged forward, climbing the logging trail past the torn edge where the black truck had gone over, past the compound now glowing with the frantic activity of men who had arrived too late, past the perimeter fence with its cut links hanging open like a wound that would never fully heal. They rode north, into the timber, into the storm. Into the last 15 miles that separated a brotherhood of wounded, bleeding, exhausted men from the woman who had spent 20 years inside a machine designed to erase her and had instead used those 20 years to document every bolt, every gear, every operator of that machine, and had then walked out of it carrying the evidence that could destroy it. 15 miles. Rachel Calloway was at the end of those miles. She had to be, because if she wasn't, if the logging camp was empty, if Rains had found her first, if 20 years of silence had ended not in reunion but in permanent erasure, then Dane Calloway would have nothing left. No sister, no evidence, no reason to believe that the systems of the world could be fought by men on motorcycles with nothing but loyalty and anger and the bone-deep refusal to accept that some people are simply meant to disappear. The rain fell harder, the engines climbed, and somewhere ahead, in the darkness between the last road and the first light, a woman sat in an abandoned building with her arms wrapped around another woman, both of them cold, both of them hungry, both of them listening to the storm for a sound that Rachel had described to Clara in whispered conversations over 20 years of shared captivity. You'll hear them before you see them, Rachel had said. Motorcycles, a lot of them, coming fast, that's how you'll know. Know what? That my brother found us. Clara had looked at her in the darkness of their room. Two women who had been taken as children by the same machine and had somehow, across 2 decades, found each other inside it and had built from that finding the only thing the machine could not manufacture or control. Hope. How can you be sure he'll come? Clara had asked. Rachel had pressed her palm against the wall of their cell, the wall with the tallied days, the scratched plaster, the evidence of years endured. Because I know who he is, and I know what he does when someone he loves is in trouble. What does he do? Rachel had closed her eyes. Everything. The logging camp appeared through the rain like a memory that refused to stay buried. 3 structures. A main building, long, low, its roof sagging under decades of snow and neglect. A equipment shed with its doors hanging open. A smaller maintenance building set apart from the others, its walls still intact, its single window showing the faintest trace of light. Not electric light, something warmer, something that flickered. Candlelight. Dane saw it, and his heart stopped. Not metaphorically. He felt the organ in his chest miss a beat, skip forward, catch itself, and resume at a frequency that was no longer compatible with rational thought. He killed his engine. The other bikes followed, 21 engines dying in sequence. The sudden silence so enormous that the rain sounded like applause. He dismounted. His injured shoulder screamed. He walked. Not ran, walked. Because running would have been the action of a man afraid the light would disappear before he reached it. And Dane Calloway had decided, somewhere on the 15-mile ride through mountain darkness, that he was finished being afraid. Fear had been his companion for 20 years. It had slept beside him, eaten with him, ridden behind him on every mile of every road. It had shaped his decisions, narrowed his world, turned his grief into a cage that he maintained with the same discipline he brought to everything else. He was done with it. He walked through the mud toward the maintenance building. The rain soaked through his cut, through his thermal, through the layers of clothing that had already been soaked and dried and soaked again throughout this endless night. He didn't feel it. He didn't feel anything except the distance between himself and that door, a distance measured not in yards but in years, 20 years, 60 feet. He reached the door, raised his fist, held it there. His knuckles hovered an inch from the weathered wood, suspended in the space between the life he had lived and the life that might begin on the other side of this threshold. He knocked. The sound was soft, almost gentle, the knock of a visitor, not an invader, the knock of someone asking permission to enter a space they understood was not theirs. Silence from inside. The candlelight flickered but didn't move. Then footsteps. Light. Careful. The footsteps of someone who had learned to move without sound because sound attracted attention, and attention attracted danger. The door opened 3 inches. A chain held it. Through the gap, an eye. Dark. Alert. Terrified and defiant in equal measure. Not Rachel's eye. Clara Voss. She was 32 years old. She had been taken when she was 9. 23 years of captivity, escape, recapture, and escape again. Her face was thin, angular, marked by exhaustion so deep it had become architectural. Part of the bone structure, part of the landscape of who she was. She looked at Dane through the 3-inch gap and saw what everyone sees when they look at a large man standing in the rain in the dark. A potential threat. "Who are you?" Her voice was hoarse, barely used, the voice of someone who had spent years speaking only to one other person. "Dane Calloway. I'm Rachel's brother." The eye blinked. The chain didn't move. "She doesn't have a brother." "She does. She had a brother who was 10 years old the last time he saw her. She was wearing pajamas with yellow flowers. She waved goodnight from the bedroom doorway." His voice broke on the last word, and he let it break because the breaking was the proof. No infiltrator, no operative, no agent of the machine that had consumed these women's lives would stand in the rain and cry about pajamas. "She dropped a photograph on a highway 3 days ago. A family photograph, our family. She dropped it because she knew I would recognize it. She's been leaving signals. And I followed them." Movement behind Clara. A second set of footsteps, slower, heavier with the weight of someone carrying not just physical exhaustion, but the accumulated tonnage of 2 decades of waiting for this exact moment. A hand appeared on Clara's shoulder. Clara turned. A whispered exchange, too quiet for Dane to hear. Then the chain slid free. The door opened. Rachel Calloway stood in the candlelight of an abandoned maintenance building on a mountain in the rain, and she looked at her brother for the first time in 20 years. She was 36, thin. Her hair was dark, pulled back, streaked with premature gray that mirrored his own. Her face carried the evidence of years, lines around the eyes, hollows beneath the cheekbones, a scar along the jaw that she had not had at 6 years old. Her hands were rough, calloused, the hands of someone who had worked and survived and endured with the particular stubbornness of a person who had been given every reason to surrender and had refused. Her eyes were the same creek water color, the same pale clarity, the same expression that Dane saw every morning in the mirror, the expression of someone who has been looking for something lost for so long that the looking has become indistinguishable from breathing. Neither spoke. There was nothing to say that the silence was not already saying. 20 years of grief, of unanswered phone calls, of closed files, of a mother who died believing her daughter was gone forever. All of it existed in the 3 feet of air between them, and no combination of words in any language could have addressed it adequately. So they didn't try. Dane stepped forward. Rachel stepped forward. The embrace was not gentle. It was not cinematic. It was the collision of 2 people who had been separated by force and were now reuniting by will, and the force of it was physical, bodies pressing together hard enough to hurt, arms tightening with a desperation that bordered on violence, the violence of people reclaiming something that was stolen from them and refusing, with every muscle and tendon and bone, to ever let it be taken again. Rachel made a sound, not a word, not a cry, something older than language, a sound from the base of the throat, from the place where the body stores the things the mind cannot process. It was the sound of a dam breaking, 20 years of water behind it. Dane held her. His injured shoulder burned. He didn't move it. He would have held her with broken arms. He would have held her if his hands were gone. The holding was not optional. It was structural. It was the thing that held him together. Behind them, the Iron Saints stood in the rain. 21 men, wet, bleeding, exhausted, standing in the mud outside an abandoned logging camp on a mountain in November, watching their road captain hold his sister for the first time since she was 6 years old. None of them moved. None of them spoke. Some of them looked away. Not from discomfort, but from respect, the instinctive understanding that what they were witnessing was private even though it was visible, sacred even though there was no ceremony. Rooster stood at the back of the group. His face was wet with rain and with something else. He wiped it with the back of his hand and looked at the sky and breathed. Bishop stood at the front. His arms were crossed. His jaw was tight. And in his eyes that had seen funerals and betrayals and the slow erosion of men's spirits under the weight of a world that did not value them, something flickered that he had not felt in years. Not joy, not yet, but the precursor, the crack in the armor through which joy might eventually enter, if given enough time and enough silence and enough proof that the fighting had been worth it. Clara Voss stepped out of the building. She stood in the doorway, her arms wrapped around herself, and looked at the bikers with an expression of absolute incomprehension. 21 men, on motorcycles, in the rain, on a mountain, for her. Nobody had ever come for her. In 23 years of captivity, not a single person had come. Compass saw her face. He walked forward, slowly, carefully, the way he had approached Noah at the depot when the boy flinched from his touch. He stopped 6 feet away, removed his helmet, let her see his face. Young, scarred, the compass rose on his neck, rain running down his shaved head. "You're Clara," he said. She nodded, unable to speak. "I'm Compass. These are the Iron Saints." He gestured at the men behind him. "We came to take you home." "I don't have a home." Compass looked at her for a long moment. Then he unzipped his jacket, pulled it off, and held it out. "You do now." The ride down the mountain took 2 hours. Rachel rode behind Dane. Clara rode behind Compass. They moved slowly. The rain was still falling, the roads were treacherous, and the cargo they carried was more valuable than anything that could be measured in weight or currency. Rachel's arms were around Dane's waist, her face pressed against his back, her eyes closed. She had not been on a motorcycle in her life. The vibration of the engine traveled through the seat and into her body, and she felt something she had forgotten was possible, the sensation of moving through space without fear, the sensation of being carried somewhere safe by someone who would not stop until they arrived. Dawn broke as they reached the valley floor. The rain stopped with the same abruptness with which it had started. The clouds separated. The first light of morning spread across the landscape like a hand opening, pale gold, cautious, touching the treetops and the wet road surface, and the chrome of 22 motorcycles with the tenderness of someone checking a wound to see if it had healed. The convoy pulled into the parking lot of a roadside diner. Mel's. The same diner where Noah had walked in 3 days earlier with a leather envelope and changed everything. The waitress behind the counter, a woman in her 50s named Dorothy, who had worked the early shift for 11 years and had seen every kind of customer the highway could produce, looked up as the door opened and 23 people walked in. Bikers. 2 women, all of them soaked, dirty, some bleeding, all of them carrying the particular exhaustion that belongs to people who have been through something that the word tired cannot contain. "Sit anywhere," Dorothy said. Then she looked more closely, saw the blood on Gaines's face. The way Dane's left arm hung slightly wrong. The 2 women who moved with the careful, tentative steps of people relearning how to exist in public spaces. "I'll get coffee." She brought 17 mugs. Then she went back and brought more. Then she brought cream and sugar and a stack of menus and a first aid kit from behind the counter that she placed on the table without being asked and without explanation, because Dorothy had spent 11 years reading people, and these people needed gauze before they needed eggs. Rachel sat in a booth. Dane sat across from her. Between them, 2 mugs of coffee steamed in the early light. She wrapped her hands around the mug. The warmth traveled through her palms, up her wrists, into arms that had been cold for so long that warmth itself felt like a foreign language being spoken for the first time. "Mom?" she asked. One word, one question, 20 years of not knowing compressed into a single syllable. Dane shook his head. Rachel closed her eyes. Her hands tightened around the mug. The surface of the coffee trembled with the vibration transferred from her fingers. She breathed, once, twice, 3 times, the deliberate breathing of someone who has just received a wound and is deciding whether to survive it. When? 12 years ago, heart failure. But it wasn't her heart that failed. It was everything else. Rachel opened her eyes. They were wet, but the tears did not fall. They sat in her eyes like water behind a dam that had been rebuilt too many times to break again. "She called the detective every month," Rachel said. "Raines. She called him every month asking about me." "I know." "He told her there were no leads." "I know." "He knew where I was the entire time." "I know, Rachel." She looked at him across the table. Brother and sister, 36 and 42. Separated at 6 and 10 and reunited on a mountain in the rain by a chain of events that began with a 13-year-old boy picking up a photograph on a highway shoulder. "Where's the boy?" Rachel asked. "The one who found the photograph?" "At the compound, waiting." "I want to meet him." "You will." Clara sat at the counter beside Rooster. She was eating toast with the focused, mechanical attention of someone for whom eating was not pleasure, but survival, a task to be completed, calories to be ingested, the body's requirements met with the same discipline that had kept her alive through 23 years of captivity. Rooster sat beside her and drank coffee and said nothing, because he understood that some people needed silence more than conversation, and that the most profound form of companionship was sometimes the simple willingness to be present without demanding anything in return. Bishop made phone calls from the parking lot to June Harlow, who had spent the night at the compound organizing evidence with Noah's help, to a contact at the state attorney general's office, not the county, not the local jurisdiction, but the state level, above Raines's reach, above the network's infiltration, to a reporter at a regional newspaper who had once written a story about the Iron Saints community work and had earned Bishop's trust by getting the details right. The evidence would go public. The files from the Halloran compound, Rachel's 20 years of documentation, June Harlow's research, the financial records linking Meridian Logistics to 14 individuals across the system. All of it, delivered simultaneously to law enforcement and media, because Bishop understood that evidence submitted through only one channel could be suppressed, but evidence released through every channel at once became a flood that no single dam could contain. At 8:12 a.m., Stokes called from the compound. "Federal agents are at the Halloran property. State police are at the depot. Raines's appointment to the task force has been suspended pending investigation." He paused. "Dane, they found records at the Halloran compound for 31 individuals. 31 people taken over a 25-year period, 17 matches to June Harlow's cases. 14 new." Dane set the phone on the table. Rachel heard the number, 31. She had known many of them, had shared walls with some, had heard others through concrete and steel, voices calling out in the dark, voices that went silent one by one as the years passed, replaced by newer voices, younger voices, the continuous intake of a machine that consumed people and produced nothing but silence. "I documented everything I could," Rachel said quietly. "Every name I heard, every face I saw, every detail of the operation, but I couldn't reach them all. I could only reach Clara. She was in the room next to mine for 15 years. You reached enough. You reached everyone you could. It wasn't enough. It was everything. At 9 a.m., a blue pickup truck pulled into the diner parking lot. Stokes was driving. In the passenger seat, Noah. The boy climbed out and stood in the parking lot, looking at the line of motorcycles, at the bikers filing out of the diner, at the two women standing near the entrance, one tall and dark-haired and carrying herself with the exhausted dignity of someone who had just escaped a lifetime, the other smaller and watchful and wearing a borrowed jacket 3 sizes too large. Noah walked toward them. Rachel watched him approach. She saw what Dane had seen, the oversized jacket, the splitting shoes, the steadiness in the eyes that was not courage but something older. The boy who had been invisible. The boy who had noticed everything. The boy who had run 2 miles in the cold to deliver a photograph to a stranger because he understood, with the instinct of someone who had been abandoned by every system designed to protect him, that sometimes the only person who will do the right thing is the person nobody is paying attention to. "You're Rachel," Noah said. "You're the boy who found the photograph." "Yes, ma'am." Rachel looked at him for a long time. Then she crouched, lowering herself to his height, the way adults do when they want a child to understand that what they are about to say is being said to them, not at them. "You saved my life," she said. "Do you understand that?" Noah's jaw worked, the same jaw tightening that had stopped his tears in the compound, the same reflex of a boy who had learned that crying was a vulnerability he could not afford. "I just picked something up," he said. "Anyone would have." "No, anyone wouldn't have." That photograph sat on a highway in November. Most people would have walked past it. Most people would have left it in the dirt. You picked it up. You opened it. You looked at it. And then you ran 2 miles in the cold to a diner full of strangers because you decided that someone needed to see it. She reached out and placed her hand on his shoulder. He did not flinch. "That's not nothing, Noah. That's everything." The boy's composure held for 3 more seconds. Then it fractured. Not dramatically, not with sobs or collapse, but with a single tear that escaped the corner of his left eye and traveled down his cheek and dropped from his jaw onto the parking lot asphalt, where it disappeared among the puddles left by the rain. Rachel pulled him into an embrace, gentle. Not the desperate collision of her reunion with Dane, something different. The embrace of a woman who understood what it meant to be a child without protection, without shelter, without anyone willing to stand between you and the cold. Dane watched from the diner entrance. Beside him, Rooster. "What happens to the kid?" Rooster asked. Dane didn't answer immediately. He watched Noah standing in Rachel's arms, a 13-year-old boy who had spent months sleeping on heating vents and eating from gas station shelves, who had walked into a diner full of bikers and changed the trajectory of dozens of lives with a leather envelope and 6 words. This fell out of that black truck. "He stays," Dane said. "With who?" "With us. With me." He paused. "I'm going to file the paperwork, whatever it takes." Rooster looked at him. "You know what that means. Background checks, home inspections, the system. The system owes him. The system doesn't pay its debts." "Then I'll make it." Dane turned to Rooster. "I owe him, Dale. Everything that happened, finding the depot, the files, Rachel, Clara, all 31 names, started because a kid nobody cared about a photograph. I'm not going to be the next person who lets him disappear." Rooster nodded slowly. Then he reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a photograph. Not Rachel's family photograph, but a picture he carried with him always. A small creased snapshot of a man in desert camouflage standing beside a vehicle in blinding sunlight, squinting at the camera with the forced smile of someone trying to look okay for the people back home. "That's me," Rooster said. 23 years old, 2 days before the convoy hit the IED. I sent that picture to my wife. She sent me divorce papers 3 months later. He put the photograph away. "Point is, I know what it looks like when somebody's standing at the edge and there's nobody behind them. That kid's been standing at that edge his whole life. If you're saying you'll stand behind him, then I'll stand behind you." The morning expanded. The sun climbed over the ridge and turned the wet road surface to gold. Steam rose from the motorcycles in the parking lot as the metal warmed, creating thin pillars of mist that dissolved into the clean November air. The diner filled with the ordinary sounds of morning, coffee being poured, plates being set down, the low murmur of conversation between people who were alive and warm and together. In the weeks that followed, the evidence dismantled the network with the slow, grinding efficiency of institutional machinery finally pointed in the right direction. Patrick Rains was arrested at his home on a Tuesday morning. He answered the door in slippers and a bathrobe and looked at the federal agents on his porch with the expression of a man who had always known this day would come and had spent 30 years preparing for it, and was now discovering that no amount of preparation can simulate the actual sensation of handcuffs closing around your wrists. 14 individuals connected to Meridian Logistics Holdings were indicted over the following month: county clerks, a records supervisor, 2 former law enforcement officers, a judge. Each arrest peeled back another layer of the network, revealing connections that reached deeper and wider than even Rachel's documentation had captured. The machine had been running for a quarter of a century. It had processed 31 lives, and it had been protected by the very institutions that every one of those 31 lives had been taught to trust. Families received calls. 17 families who had been told to stop looking. 14 families who had never been told anything at all. Some received the news they had been waiting years to hear. Their loved ones were alive, were safe, were coming home. Others received different news. Harder news. The kind of news that closes a chapter even as it opens a wound. But every family received the truth. And the truth, however painful, was preferable to the silence that had been imposed upon them by people who had decided that their grief was an acceptable cost of doing business. Rachel testified before a federal grand jury on a Wednesday afternoon in December. She wore a plain gray suit that she had borrowed from June Harlow because she did not own civilian clothing. She had not chosen her own clothes in 20 years. She spoke for 4 hours. Her voice was steady. Her hands were steady. And when she was done, the lead prosecutor stood in the hallway outside the courtroom and told a cluster of reporters that the testimony represented the most comprehensive account of a long-term trafficking operation ever presented in that jurisdiction. Clara testified the following week, shorter, quieter, but equally devastating because Clara's testimony included the detail that June Harlow had discovered but could never prove, that Boyd Ulrich, Rains's former partner, had recaptured her after her first escape and returned her to captivity. That Ulrich had died not of a heart attack, but of chemical exposure administered by the network when he became a liability. That the system had killed one of its own operators to protect itself. June Harlow published her story, not in the newspaper that had been purchased and gutted, in a new publication, an independent outlet funded by readers rather than corporate interests. The story ran as a 12-part series and was picked up by national media within a week. June's name appeared in places she had never expected to see it, attached to a piece of journalism that she had spent 6 years believing would never see the light. Noah moved into Dane's apartment. It was not a large apartment. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen that was functional in the way that kitchens belonging to men who eat most meals at diners are functional. Clean but underused, stocked with coffee and peanut butter, and not much else. The second bedroom had been a storage space. Dane cleared it in one evening. Boxes of motorcycle parts, old club records, the accumulated debris of a life organized around a single purpose that had now been fulfilled. He bought a bed, a desk, a lamp. He stood in the doorway of the empty room and looked at the bare walls and the bare floor and felt the full weight of what he was doing, not just providing shelter for a child, but allowing a child to enter the fortress he had built around himself, opening the walls, letting someone in. Noah arrived with a single backpack containing everything he owned. He stood in the doorway of his room and looked at the bed and the desk and the lamp and said nothing for a long time. "It's not much," Dane said. "It's mine? It's yours." Noah set his backpack on the desk, sat on the bed, pressed his palms against the mattress, testing its reality the way you test ice before walking on it. "Nobody's going to take it back?" "Nobody's going to take it back." The boy looked at the wall, looked at the ceiling, looked at the window through which the late afternoon sun was casting a rectangle of warm light across the floor. "Okay," he said. And in that single word was everything. The acceptance, the disbelief, The cautious beginning of trust extended by someone who had been given every reason to withhold it. 3 months later, the Iron Saints hosted a community ride. Not a protest ride. Not a charity run. A memorial ride. Honoring the families who had been told to stop searching, honoring the 31 lives that had been stolen, honoring the truth that had finally been spoken after decades of enforced silence. The ride ended at the compound, where the gravel yard had been transformed. Tables with food, coffee urns, families standing in clusters, some meeting for the first time, connected by the shared experience of having lost someone to a machine that was supposed to protect them. Children ran between the motorcycles, touching chrome and leather with the fearless curiosity of young people who did not yet understand what these machines had done and simply found them magnificent. Rachel stood near the main building, beside a wall that had been erected for the occasion. It was covered with photographs, restored, enlarged, reframed. Family photographs that had been recovered from the filing cabinets at the freight depot and the Halloran compound. 31 faces, 31 lives, some restored to their families, others memorialized for the families that remained. She held one photograph. She had been holding it all morning. The photograph, the original, the one that had started everything. 2 adults, 2 children, a farmhouse porch, a boy who knew it wouldn't last, a girl who never got the chance to find out. Dane walked up beside her. He was wearing his cut. His shoulder had healed, mostly. It ached in the cold, which the doctor said it would do for the rest of his life, and Dane had accepted this as the body's way of remembering what the mind sometimes tried to forget. "Ready?" he asked. Rachel nodded. She stepped forward and placed the photograph on the wall, not tacked up, not taped, placed in a frame, a simple wooden frame that Dane had bought at a hardware store and that bore no inscription because none was needed. The photograph was what it was, a family, before, and now, after. The crowd quieted, not because anyone called for silence, but because the sight of a woman placing a photograph on a memorial wall carries its own gravity. A gravity that even children can feel, even strangers can recognize, even the wind seems to respect by dropping to nothing for the duration of the gesture. Rachel turned to face the gathered families. She looked at them the way someone looks at a landscape after a storm, assessing the damage, acknowledging the loss, beginning the slow and imperfect process of imagining what might grow in the ground that has been cleared. "I was 6 years old," she said. Her voice carried across the yard, steady, clear, weathered by everything it had survived. "I was 6 years old, and I was taken from my family by people who were supposed to keep me safe. For 20 years, I lived inside a system that treated people like inventory. I was moved, documented, stored, and managed by individuals who wore badges and held titles and sat behind desks in buildings that taxpayers funded." She paused. "The system that was supposed to find me was the system that hid me." She looked at Dane. "My brother never stopped. I need you to hear that. For 20 years, when every agency closed the door, when every official said there were no leads, when the world told him to accept the loss and move on, he never stopped. And when I found a way to send a signal, he followed it, not because it was easy, not because it was safe, because that's what family does." She looked at Noah, who was standing beside Rooster near the fence, wearing a new jacket that fit him in shoes without holes, and carrying himself with the first traces of a posture that did not anticipate impact. And a 13-year-old boy picked up a photograph on a highway because he thought someone might need it. He didn't know what it was. He didn't know who it belonged to. He didn't know that it would lead to 31 families getting answers. He just knew that something lost should be returned. She looked at the memorial wall. 31 photographs, 31 frames, some faces smiling, some faces serious, all of them real and present and no longer hidden. That's all I want to say. That lost things can be found, that silence can be broken, and that sometimes the people who save you are not the people the world told you to trust. Sometimes they're the people the world told you to fear. The crowd was still. Then, from somewhere in the back, a sound. Not applause, something else. An engine. Then another. Then another. The Iron Saints, standing beside their bikes along the fence line, were starting their machines, not to leave, but to speak. The engines rumbled to life, one after another, in the deep, rolling cadence that Rachel had described to Clara in the dark of their shared captivity. You'll hear them before you see them. Motorcycles. A lot of them. Coming fast. That's how you'll know. The sound filled the compound. It filled the valley. It rolled across the ridge and into the mountains and echoed off the timber where, 3 months earlier, 22 men had ridden through a storm to bring 2 women out of the dark. Rachel closed her eyes and listened. When the engines faded, she opened her eyes and found Dane standing beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders. She leaned into him, the lean of someone who had been standing alone for so long that the act of leaning against another person was itself a revolution, a complete restructuring of the physics of being alive. Noah appeared on her other side. He didn't speak. He just stood there, close enough that his shoulder touched her arm, occupying space beside her with the quiet conviction of someone who had finally found a place where his presence was not merely tolerated but wanted. Dane looked down at the boy, then at his sister, then at the wall of photographs, then at the men in leather and denim and road dust who had bled for people they had never met and had done so not because they were saints or heroes or anything the world would recognize as virtuous, but because they understood something fundamental about the human contract, that you do not leave people behind. Not in deserts, not in parking garages, not in abandoned buildings on mountains, not on heating vents behind Dollar Generals. You do not leave them behind because the moment you do, you become the system that failed them. Later that evening, after the families had left and the tables had been cleared and the compound had returned to its functional austerity, Dane walked into the main building and stood before the long-scarred table where everything had been planned. The war council, the arguments, the fear, the decisions that had cost sleep and blood, and the comfortable illusion that justice was someone else's responsibility. He reached into his jacket and pulled out the family photograph. He held it for a moment, turned it over, read the handwriting on the back one final time. Calloway family, 1998, before. He crossed out the last word with a pen from his pocket, wrote beside it, in his own handwriting, steady and deliberate, and after. Then he placed the photograph in a new frame, a simple wooden frame, identical to the ones on the memorial wall, and set it on the shelf above the table. Not hidden, not locked away, not carried in a pocket against his chest like a wound. Placed in the open, in the light, where it belonged. He stepped back and looked at it. A family on a porch. A boy who knew it wouldn't last. A girl who didn't get the chance to find out. Both of them grown now. Both of them damaged. Both of them standing on the other side of 20 years of darkness with nothing to show for the passage except scars and the stubborn refusal to let the darkness win. The door opened behind him. Noah walked in. The boy crossed the room and stood beside Dane and looked at the photograph. "That's you," Noah said. "The boy. That's me. You look angry." "I wasn't angry. I was scared." "Of what?" Dane looked at the boy, looked at the photograph, looked at the room where men had gathered and argued and decided to ride into the dark because a piece of a family had been lost and the world had stopped looking. "Of losing them," he said. "I was scared of losing them." Noah nodded. He understood. He had been scared of the same thing his entire life, not of losing a specific person, but of losing the possibility that there were people worth losing. That somewhere in the architecture of the world, there existed a structure called family that was not made of paperwork and placements and the bureaucratic machinery of care, but of something simpler, harder, more real, presence, loyalty. The willingness to ride through a storm for someone you hadn't seen in 20 years because a child you'd never met brought you a photograph and said 6 words that changed everything. "Dane," Noah said. "Yeah." "Is this what it is?" "Family." Dane looked at the boy, at the new jacket, the new shoes, the face that was beginning, slowly and imperfectly, to unlearn the expectation of pain. "Yeah, kid, this is what it is." Outside, the last light of evening touched the compound. The motorcycles sat in their row along the fence, chrome catching the dying sun, leather cooling in the November air. The flag on the wall stirred in a breeze that carried pine resin and cold earth, and the faint, dissipating rumble of engines somewhere on a distant road, The sound of men riding home from a place they had built together, to families they had chosen, on machines that spoke the only language they had ever fully trusted, the language of the road, the language of the ride, the language of people who understand that the world breaks everyone, and that the only thing worth building from the wreckage is a shelter large enough to hold the people who have nowhere else to go. The photograph sat on the shelf, the light held, and for the first time in 20 years, the compound was quiet. Not the silence of waiting, not the silence of dread, not the silence that fills the space where a missing person used to be, but the silence of rest, the silence of a story that had reached its end, the silence of a family, imperfect and scarred and assembled from the most unlikely components imaginable, finally sitting still, finally home.